These are the best what ifs to fall asleep to.
What if Darth Maul killed Darth Sidious on Mandalore? Our story begins on Mandalore as Maul sits in his newly acquired throne with his brother by his side. He couldn't help but feel proud at himself. After months of planning, his grand scheme was finally coming to fruition. With Mandalore under his control, it was only a matter of time before the rest of the coalition of neutral systems was under his leadership. But then, something began to change within the Force. He could feel the shivers of fear run down his spine. He felt a dark presence he hasn't felt since his master, Darth Sidious, was here. But how and why? He thought he would have been preoccupied with the war and his grand plan. But before he could fully comprehend what was happening, his former master in the flesh was in front of him. As fear and horror overcame Maul, he instinctively bowed down to his former master and tried to talk his way out of this. But that was impossible now, as Sidious saw right through his ploy and force pushed him and Savage into the glass and out of the window. Coming to the realization that there was only one way he could come out of this alive, he and Savage would attack the Sith with all of their might. As a crimson blade clashed and echoed through the halls, Sidious would begin to realize that his former apprentice had grown significantly stronger since his last encounter with him, but that did not matter as he would make short work of Maul and his brother if he was correct. As their fight continued, Maul and Savage would begin to chip away at Sidious's endurance and power as they kept on persisting. Seeing how Maul's brother was a weaker of the two, Sidious would try to separate him and then target Maul, which would prove to be harder than expected as Maul and Savage would stay close together and would never leave each other's side. Ironic, they reminded Sidious a lot like the Jedi, weak and unwilling to sacrifice one another. Well then, if they acted like the Jedi, then they shall die like the Jedi. Summoning more of his strength, Sidious would charge at Savage and managed to backflip over him and cut him across the back and force push him into a wall. As Savage cried out in pain, Maul would realize that it was up to him to kill Palpatine to live another day. Channeling all of his hatred to the Jedi, the Sith, the galaxy, everything, Maul would rush at the Sith with a fury he's never achieved before and fought Palpatine, pushing his former master into a defensive form for a short amount of time as the old man's exhaustion started to catch up with him. And that was until Palpatine had enough and went to end the rogue Sith once and for all by doing the spin of death, when he suddenly felt a hot pain through his chest. And when he looked down, he saw a red crimson blade burning a hole through his chest. And before he could react to that, Maul ran up to the Sith and beheaded him, ending the Sith Lord's life. After seeing the lifeless body of Palpatine fall to the ground, the man who caused all of his pain, Maul ran over to his dying brother's side, who used the last of his strength to throw his saber into Palpatine to save his brother's life. Unfortunately, although Savage was able to save Maul, Maul was not able to return the favor, as his brother gave in to his wounds. Following this, Maul would begin the construction of a new army, not of just Mandalorians, but this time of criminals as well. He would create the first criminal empire. A few days later, the Republic Senate would be thrown into disarray as our Chancellor still had not returned from wherever he went. The truth is, only Mas Almeida knew where Palpatine truly was. He was supposed to be on Mandalore fighting the rogue Sith, but Mas couldn't just tell everyone about Palpatine's true intentions, so he would lie and say that Palpatine was killed by a separatist while on a diplomatic mission to Mandalore, which would erupt the Senate into mass chaos. And before the Senate could decide on the next course of action, a Senate transmission from Mandalore appeared in front of them. And much to the shock of Yoda and Mace who were viewing this situation, the rogue Sith Darth Maul was at the forefront holding the head of Palpatine. And while his message was brief, he made it clear that Palpatine was a Sith and that a new empire was to come, a criminal empire. And just like that, he was gone. And for the first time in thousands of years, the entire Galactic Senate was quiet. Not a word was muttered for what felt like hours until absolute chaos broke out. But they wouldn't even have time for that, as only minutes later, reports would come in as an army of what seemed to be criminals and Mandalorians started to lay siege to the Outer Rim worlds from the newly formed Crimson Dawn under the control of Maul. And while the newly formed empire was small, it was large enough to take control over multiple star systems. And this would send the already crippled Republic into mass turmoil as the already depleted clone army and the weakened Jedi tried to protect what they could, but were quickly falling back. Back in the Senate, there were multiple discussions all at once on what the next course of action should be, and no matter how hard Mas tried, there was no order in the court. But eventually, the senators would agree that it was time for the purchase of 10 million more clones, with an overwhelming 90% in favor of it. But that would come at the cost of a loss of funding from many support groups throughout the galaxy that gave help and supplies to those who needed it. And due to that, many star systems became desperate and would leave the Republic to join the warring factions, which would weaken the Republic even further. And while the Republic might have put up a very tough fight in the Outer Rim, the Crimson Dawn was pushing through and started to construct a larger army of criminals. Soon after taking most of the Outer Rim and having a large enough army, the new criminal empire led by Maul would begin to attack the Mid-Rim, but this time, unlike their previous conquests, they were met with a lot more resistance, and this time not from the Republic, but rather the CIS, who realized that the criminal empire, if it kept growing stronger, would rival the might of the Separatists. and due to having no shortage of battle droids, the CIS would begin a full-fledged campaign against the Crimson Dawn, and would begin to fight back on the backwater worlds of the galaxy that once belonged to them, and they would send millions of B-1 and B-2 battle droids to recapture their lost land. However, Maul, thanks to spending a lot of time with Palpatine, learned how to create contingency plans, and had already begun preparing for a moment like this, and waited to the right moment to release his own army of battle droids that he had made in a forgotten droid factory. And while his army was nowhere near as much as the CIS, nor as well equipped, it would cause some confusion among many separatist generals who often mistook the enemy droids as their own, and the CIS were soon starting to lose their war. Eventually, following the creation of their own battle droid army, Maul would begin to experiment on creating his own clone army, but that would be quickly shot down as the Republic intervened and fought off the Empire thanks to General Skywalker and Obi-Wan, who had finally begun their hunt of Maul. But while the Republic may have been able to stop Maul's Empire from creating their own clone army, they unfortunately were not able to prevent the creation of over 8 million new battle droids on Maul's side, who with that number managed to take over another droid factory, and this would force the war to rage on for 2 more years as both the Republic and CIS began to get pushed back by Maul's Empire, which the Republic thought was impossible as a criminal empire should have been weakened. But due to the Republic leaving the underworld and the criminal syndicates unchecked for multiple years, their power and influence across the galaxy had far surpassed what the Republic thought was possible. But thanks to the leadership of the newly elected Supreme Chancellor Bail Organa, the Republic was able to secure some peace talks with the Separatist Alliance, who both agreed that if they were to stay at war with each other, they would both perish in a matter of years. And so they would both reluctantly agree for a temporary peace treaty and focus all of their resources on taking down the rogue Sith Empire. And while Dooku may have disagreed with any peace treaty back when Palpatine was still alive, he realized that if the Separatists wanted to survive, they would need the Republic's help. And while the Republic and CIS might have agreed to work together, it was not an easy task, as many clones and Jedi had a very hard time being able to trust their lives with the very people who just a few months ago were at war with. But nevertheless, they would start to work together and begin to take on the growing threat of the criminal empire. Maul, however, would not be concerned. He always knew that something like this would happen, and he, like his late master, was already working on another plan. And this plan of his was to create a new dark side apprentice. And with the help of the Night Sisters and some holocrons by Darth Plagueis, Maul would be able to create a young Zabrak boy born of pure dark side and Night Sister magic, and his name was Malachi. And while he was only 16 thanks to his enhanced aging, he was already far more powerful than most Jedi Knights, and he housed many similar features to that of Savage. And he would prove his power in the dark side when he was able to take on a group of Jedi and clones and left no survivors. He would also prove his loyalty to Maul when he managed to kill the rogue group of Mandalorians led by Bo-Katan and a young Twi'lek Jedi named Ahsoka. And while the Jedi might have put up a tough fight, Malachi was able to kill her and the rest of her rebel cell. Eventually, the Jedi Order, who already almost lost 1,000 Jedi members, would take on a drastic action as it would knight over 500 Jedi Padawans, and would take a drastic action and collect over 2,000 infants to be trained, which definitely made them less popular in the public opinion. But this would help the Republic lead to an influx of victories. But this also would lead to a decrease in Republic morale, as many deaths would occur as ill-trained Jedi Knights were thrown into battles. And while the galaxy was in a dark and grim place, there was a new hope emerging, as Anakin's power was increasing every day, and after a couple of years, his power would even rival that of Grandmaster Yoda, who, similar to Dooku's, old age was catching up to them, although Dooku's was much worse as the dark side started to affect his body in worse ways. And while on a mission with his old master Yoda, they would be confronted by Maul and a legion of Mandalorians, and despite them being caught off guard, Dooku would decide to take on Maul while Yoda attacked the Mandalorians, which, due to their old age, was not an easy task, as Maul was able to match each and every one of Dooku's strikes, and nearly took off his head, but was stopped by Grandmaster Yoda, who decided to fight alongside his former Padawan. And the combined power of both Force wielders started to be too much for Maul, and while retreating made it seem like the best option, he decided that he wouldn't do that, as he would engage the Jedi once again, as he force pushed Dooku and flipped over Yoda, and only milliseconds after that would quickly deflect one of Dooku's strikes before ducking under Dooku and stabbing him through the back, just like he did with Qui-Gon Jinn all those years ago, only this time behind him. To much of the horror of Yoda, who after seeing another one of his friends get mortally wounded, would charge at Maul, catching him off guard, and would quickly slice off one of his arms and would shoot a powerful barrage of Force judgment that he learned from Plo Koon at Maul. And Maul, having no other choice, would make his escape with barely his life. As Yoda watched Maul's ship leave, Yoda would use the Force to crush one of its engines and would watch the ship crash down into the surface of the planet. But before it crashed, an escape pod would eject and would squirm its way out and would jump into hyperspace. Turning away in anger, Yoda would run to Dooku's side and would comfort his former Padawan in his last moments, where Dooku would apologize for turning to the dark side and would reveal to Yoda the true plans of the inheritorships and the clones. And just like his Padawan, Dooku would die as a result of Maul, and would join the light side of the Force one last time. With the death of Dooku, there would be an open position for leadership in the CIS, and while Wat Tambor was initially going to take it, he mysteriously turned up dead, which would make way for the psychotic robot General Grievous to become the leader of the CIS. And his first course of action as the leader would be to ramp up the production of battle droids by 40%. And while the Republic and CIS were technically at peace right now, that did not mean they trusted the cyborg general. If anything, this only heightened their tensions. But even though the Republic did not want to admit it, they were starting to win this war. This would be proven by their first major victory, which would be given when Anakin Skywalker and Plo Koon managed to take over Tatooine and would put an end to the Hutt cartel for good by killing Jabba and capturing most of the Hutt leaders. But that would be a very costly battle, as Maul was not willing to give up the planet without a fight, due to that being the location of one of their droid factories. And the Jedi would also lose many members, including Jedi Master Jara Tapal and Jedi Knight Cal Kestis, and thousands of clones, including Commander Cody, who would die in Obi-Wan's arms. But the Jedi would prevail and continue to drive the Crimson Dawn out of the system, and that would be a major blow to Maul, as the Hutts are one of his main suppliers, and now without them, he was set back quite a bit. After the liberation of Tatooine, Yoda would begin to do a bit of research in the clones and the inhibitor chips. And thanks to Five's research before he died, Yoda would learn of Order 66, which would shock him. And while yes, he did know that the clones were made by the Sith, he was still shocked that the Jedi were so blind to this. This would result in Yoda calling an emergency meeting with the Jedi Council, where they would decide to slowly withdraw the clones from battle to remove their inhibitor chips. However, this was a really risky decision, as it would lead them open to attacks. However, the process in which they would remove the inhibitor chips was very quick, as it only took them around 5 minutes to do, and the clones would rebound very quickly and return to battle, and after only 2 months, the entire Grand Army of the Republic was freed from the inhibitor chips. And this, partnered with the recent victories, the Republic and Separatist morale was at an all-time high as they kept on pushing back Maul's empire. But Maul still had one secret weapon left up his sleeve, and that was his apprentice Malachi, whose power over the years had significantly increased, so much so that he was even able to kill Opa Ren Sissis on the battle. But that would backfire, as it would be the final straw for the Jedi, who would make Malachi their #1 target and would begin to send out search and destroy parties. But as they searched the galaxy for the new Sith assassin, he would just drop off the radar. And following that, Maul would also seemingly disappear as well. But that would not matter, as the Crimson Dawn was still able to fight back against the Republic and was actually able to secure many more planets to their cause, such as Ryloth and Mon Cala, which was a major blow to the Republic, as they were one of the best shipbuilders in the galaxy. And because of that, the Republic would begin to lose many battles across the galaxy, as they're far superior of that of many regular warships. But luckily, in this time frame, they would be able to locate the planet in which Maul was hiding, which was the Sith planet of Malachor. But before they could decide on a course of action to take, they would be notified that General Grievous and over half of the Separatist army had broken off from the Alliance and joined Maul. But before he left, he would destroy almost all the droid factories and would completely decimate Geonosis, leaving it a complete barren wasteland with no living inhabitants, which would cripple the Republic and the remaining Separatists. And this would cost them many planets to fall out of their control. And as if the Jedi couldn't catch a break, Grandmaster Yoda would also die only a few months later, when he and Anakin were attacked by a legion of Mandalorians and criminals, which this fight would not have been a challenge for a younger Yoda, but due to his old age, it finally got the best of him as he was shot in the back by Gar Saxon, sending Anakin into a blinding rage, killing all of the Mandalorians. And wasting no time, Anakin would bring Yoda back to the Jedi Temple and would try to save him, but Yoda would refuse and tell Anakin that it was the will of the Force. But before he died and joined the Force, he would make Anakin a Jedi Master. After the funeral of Master Yoda, the Jedi would select a new Grand Master, which would be none other than Mace Windu, who would humbly accept the offer. And under the new leadership of Mace Windu, the Jedi would begin to lead many successful campaigns against the Crimson Dawn, and would bring home some much-needed victories. However, this success would only be short-lived, as Supreme Chancellor Bail Organa would be killed while on a mission to Mon Cala to try and restore friendly relations. However, he would never arrive to the planet, as he was killed shortly after entering the atmosphere by General Grievous, who ambushed him. And all of this would be watched from the shadows of Malachor, where Maul continued his training of Malachi, who is now arguably stronger than almost any other Jedi. And Maul, seeing this, would gift Malachi a second lightsaber. And while this was happening, Maul would begin to see the instability across the galaxy, and would begin preparations for a full-scale invasion of Coruscant. And thanks to General Grievous's intel, they would begin their attack on Coruscant, led by Maul, Malachi, and General Grievous. And while a main part of the battle was in the sky, the Crimson Dawn, led by General Grievous, would charge at the surface of Coruscant and would begin their conquest there. And while there was very stiff resistance on the surface, Grievous would destroy anything that stood in his way, as he only had one target, the Senate building. In the flagship of the Crimson Dawn, Maul and Malachi would depart for the Jedi Temple to wipe out the Jedi once and for all. And thanks to the Cyber General, many of the Jedi would be at the Senate building, leaving only the weaker Jedi at the temple, which made it the perfect time for an attack. And just as Maul predicted, most of the Jedi left the temple to stop General Grievous Grievous in the Senate, which would be much harder than they thought, as General Grievous not only set the entire building on fire, but also hid the captured senators across the building, which added to the fact that there were already tens of thousands of battle droids in there, made it practically impossible to save everyone. But they would not back down and would decide to split up into multiple groups to save anyone they could, which was just what General Grievous wanted them to do, as he lurked in the shadows. Back at the Jedi Temple, Maul and Malachi made their way through the halls and slaughtered everyone there. It was even easier than they thought, as they managed to wipe out floor after floor, and after making it to the 5th floor of the Jedi Temple, they were stopped by Anakin, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, as well as Agen Kolar. And after waiting years for this moment, Maul would be overcome with rage and anger towards Obi-Wan and would tell Malachi to take on the other Jedi, and that Kenobi was his. Cut back to the space battle, it was a pretty even fight, but even so, Maul's empire was slowly gaining ground, as they used unconventional methods to fight off the Republic and Separatist forces. But thanks to the help of many great Jedi pilots such as Saesee Tiin, they would be able to keep on fighting against their enemy. But as long as the Crimson Dawn's flagship was still intact, the battle droids would not stop. So Saesee Tiin would order all the remaining starfighters to begin their attack on the flagship. Back in the Senate building, it was getting harder and harder to find the senators, as much of the Senate building was already on fire, and many of the rooms started to collapse. But the Jedi would not retreat, as they kept on searching through the Senate, trying to save anyone they could. Unfortunately, the Jedi would only manage to save a little over half of the senators before they were forced to retreat. But leaving the Senate would be almost impossible, as battle droids patrolled all the halls and shot anything that moved. And eventually, after a long time of searching, they would finally find an exit. But right as they reached it, General Grievous would finally show himself and would charge at the Jedi, quickly cutting down 4 of the Jedi Masters protecting the senators. But before Grievous could kill everyone there, he would finally meet his match, as Jedi Master Kelleran Beq stepped from behind him and would challenge him to a fight. Back at the Jedi Temple, Maul was quickly showing to Obi-Wan that this would be the hardest fight of his life, as Maul swung his blade with such strength and ferocity that every time it clashed against Obi-Wan's, Kenobi would be forced to take a few steps back. But realizing that Maul's aggression was actually making him sloppy, Obi-Wan would use this to his advantage, as Maul tried to use the same move he used on Qui-Gon all those years ago, and Obi-Wan would play along with this until the last moment, where he would sidestep and trip Maul, angering him even further, which caused him to swing more wildly and sloppy. But as Obi-Wan ducked under one of Maul's strikes, he felt a searing pain in his left leg as Maul cut deep into his flesh, and would use this opportunity to cut off one of Obi-Wan's hand. It was about to go in for the kill when Kenobi force pushed Maul into a wall, when Obi-Wan lunged from where he was and was about to plunge his lightsaber into Maul's heart, when Maul suddenly grabbed him by the neck and was about to snap it, when Maul suddenly fell to the ground as a purple lightsaber burned a hole in his chest, ending the Sith's life. Back in the space battle, the Republic forces were able to land a critical hit on the flagship, and were moving in for the next strike when Saesee Tiin was blown out of the sky by a group of TIE-fighters. But despite this devastating loss, the assault would continue, as the Republic forces managed to blow up the ship's thrusters and hit its hyperdrive, making it a sitting duck. And right after that, Captain Rex would seize their opportunity and would land the final blow, destroying the Crimson Dawn's flagship, automatically shutting down all of the battle droids under Maul's control, which allowed the Republic and Separatists to destroy much of the remaining fleet. Back in the Senate building, General Grievous laughed at the Jedi. How could he be so stupid to challenge him? Didn't he know who he was? It didn't matter, however. General Grievous would slowly walk over to him with his lightsaber spinning very fast as a way to intimidate the Jedi. But Kelleran would not move, as he instantly force-pulled one of General Grievous' lightsabers from his hand and charged at him, and would quickly use the Force again to force-push General Grievous into the flames. And before Grievous even had time to get up, Kelleran was already on top of him, destroying his defenses, and Grievous would quickly kick the Jedi off and would begin to throw fiery debris at the Jedi, who easily deflected all of the debris to the side, and would lunge at the cyborg once again. After Kelleran dodged another one of Grievous's attack and cut off one of his arms, Grievous started to think that maybe he had underestimated this Jedi, as he was putting up much more of a fight than any other Jedi had. And Kelleran would seize this opportunity and would switch up to Form 1, Grievous's single weakness. Grievous would try to jab at Kelleran, but would miss, as the Jedi would slide under it and slice across his leg, and would force push Grievous across the room. And before Grievous could even move, Kelleran would run up to him and cut off 2 of his arms, leaving him with only 1 lightsaber. Seeing how he was outmatched by the Jedi, Grievous would call to his droids to kill him. But that was impossible. The only way that could have happened is if the flagship was destroyed. And after looking through the hole in the Senate building, he saw an explosion on where the flagship used to be. And while Grievous was incredibly angered, he realized that that's what you get when you use the cheaper and older models of droids. Overcame with anger, Grievous would charge at Kelleran one last time, would order the remaining droids to shoot at him, which Kelleran would easily deflect back at the Grievous and once again engage Grievous in a saber lock, where Grievous would use a cybernetic foot to grab another lightsaber and was about to raise it up to stab Kelleran, but would be too slow as the Jedi Master would flip over him and would cut off his legs and would stab him in the head, finally ending the mad cyborg. After that, Kelleran would destroy the remaining droids and would help evacuate the surviving senators outside of the building, where only moments after leaving the Senate building, the entire building would collapse, killing anyone who was unfortunate enough to be left inside of the building. Back in the Jedi Temple, Malachi looked over hoping to see his master and call him over to help him, only to see that he was dead. Filled with more rage than he'd ever felt before, he would unleash a Force scream and would shot Force lightning at all of the Jedi. And the second he stopped doing that, he would lunge at Aiden Kolar and would cut off his arm and then his lower half, and would rush straight towards Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi. And while Mundi stood no chance against the powerful Sith as he quickly fell dead, Plo Koon would shoot his own barrage of Force judgment at the young Zabrak, which shocked him, as he quickly tried to deflect it. And while it was not as powerful, it gave Plo the opportunity he needed to land a blow against Malachi. Following in his footsteps, Mace Windu and Anakin would charge at the Sith, but before anything could reach him, he would release a powerful Force illusion, making it seem as if there were dozens of Malachi. Feeding off of their fear, Malachi would single out Plo Koon and would try to slice at his feet but would miss, and quickly blocked a returning blow. And sensing through the Force, Malachi would be able to feel Plo Koon and would spin around him and slice him across the chest, leaving him gasping for air, leaving only Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker left. And as Malachi began to attack Mace Windu, which would prove to be a mistake, as Mace would use Vaapad against Malachi to feed off of his anger, Mace Windu would manage to cut one of Malachi's lightsabers in half, and Anakin would seize the opportunity to try to distract the Sith by throwing his lightsaber at him and Force pushing him. But Malachi would easily dodge that and would return the favor by shooting Force lightning at Anakin's face. And Mace Windu, seeing an opening in the Sith's defense, was able to use the opportunity to cut the side of the Sith and was about to kill him once and for all when he was stopped by Malachi, when he delivered a quick liver punch to Mace Windu, followed by a quick stab in his upper chest. After seeing Mace Windu fall, Anakin ran towards the Sith and would use chunks of the temple to throw at Malachi, and would manage to land another blow on him, but would quickly be countered and would be forced to enhance his speed to push back against the Sith, which would only anger Malachi even further as he started to fight more aggressively like his master. And after a few minutes of lightsaber duels, Anakin would see an opening in Malachi's defense and would uppercut him in the face. And Malachi, stunned by this, would force push Anakin off of this and would quickly punch him in the gut, leaving Anakin out of breath. But using his anger, Anakin retaliated by a quick punch to Malachi's throat, and as Malachi tried to catch his breath, Anakin would sneak behind it, would slam him to the ground, and would start beating the Sith until he was force pushed off of him, where Anakin would use this to pull his lightsaber to his hand, and where he would slice across Malachi's stomach and would use the momentum to stab his head. And as the Sith fell, Anakin would stand in shock as he looked around him and saw all the pain and destruction that had occurred because of the Sith. And Anakin would quickly rush out of it, seeing that some of the Jedi were still alive, and would rush them to the medbay. In the moment Anakin got them to a safe location, he would run to the Senate building, where he was met with the horrifying discovery that the entire building had collapsed. And after arriving to the former entrance of the Senate building, he would rush over and would see that Padme was still alive. After the Battle of Coruscant was finished and the Crimson Dawn was destroyed for good, the Republic and Separatists would agree to join together once again, but only under the condition that the Republic had to change many other policies, in which after much negotiating, they would reluctantly agree to this. And thus the Clone Wars would end, and at the end of the war, over 3,000 Jedi were killed. And while it would take many decades, the galaxy would rebuild and recover, and the Jedi would learn from their past mistakes, and would decide to once again have many temples spread out across the galaxy to truly be the heroes the people needed. And while the temple on Coruscant still stood as their main temple, it wouldn't be required for the Jedi to live there. And Anakin, seeing how the Jedi had improved and the threat of the Sith finally gone, Anakin would decide to leave the Jedi Order in the trusted hands of Plo Koon and Obi-Wan, and the newly appointed council member Kelleran Beck, who proved himself after killing General Grievous. And after this, Anakin, Padme, and his two kids, Luke and Leia, would retire from their former roles and would live on the planet of Naboo, where Anakin would train his children in the ways of the Force. What if Anakin Skywalker reached his full potential? Our story begins on Obadiah, where Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker just watched as Silman was lifted up into the air and was choked to death by Count Dooku. This would be a major setback for the Jedi, as he was about to reveal some crucial information in regards to the mystery surrounding the Sith and the Clone Army, although any hopes of learning about that was now lost forever. As the Jedi fought Dooku, Anakin and Obi-Wan would push him back through the hallways and into a balcony, where Dooku nearly kicked Obi-Wan off the building and force pushed Anakin away. As Dooku sprinted towards Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan would flip over him and kick him in the back, followed by Anakin attempting to disarm Dooku, but to no avail, as Dooku just shot a fury of Force lightning at him, forcing Anakin to his knees as he cried in pain. And out of the corner of Dooku's eyes, he could see that the pikes were starting to close in on him, and so he would force push all of the pikes out of the balcony, sending them flying to their deaths. Sensing that the Count was distracted, Obi-Wan would seize the opportunity and was about to stab Dooku from behind when Dooku ducked under that and used Obi-Wan's momentum against him and cut him across the gut. As he fell to the ground lifeless, Anakin would lower his lightsaber and look in shock at Dooku, as he just stood there, eyes as yellow as gold. And then, overcame with rage, Anakin ran out of Dooku, but was quickly force pushed smashed into a wall, knocking him out. When Anakin woke up, he was in a place he was not familiar with, but before he had a chance to get up, he was soon confronted by a being of which he was not familiar with, although he for some reason knew who it was at the same time, and that's when it came to him. The Whills. He has heard stories of their existence before as a youngling, but he never imagined them as people who actually existed. As he looked into their faces, he was about to ask what they wanted from him when he suddenly heard a calm and steady voice asking if he was indeed the Chosen One. And as if his body and voice was no longer his own, he would simply reply with, "I am if that is my destiny," to which they would reply with, "Then you will bring balance to the Force." And at that very moment, Anakin opened his eyes and saw that Dooku's lightsaber was mere inches away from his face. However, it wasn't moving, and that's when Anakin looked at Dooku and saw that he had a look of horror on his face. And that's when Anakin realized that he was the one holding Dooku's lightsaber with just the Force without even realizing it. As he got up, he would look at Dooku and then at the body of Obi-Wan. But instead of feeling anger towards Dooku, he would feel sadness towards him, and then would look at him and would simply just say, "You chose the wrong path," as he force pushed him away so far that Anakin could not see him with his now heightened awareness. Sensing that his former master was now one with the Force, Anakin would take him back to the temple and would inform the Jedi Council of what had happened there. After the funeral, Anakin found himself not angry at what had happened or wanting revenge, but rather at peace with himself, as he accepted the fact that Obi-Wan was now one with the living Force, something that the younger Anakin would have never come to the conclusion of. After this, he would meet with the Council once again and inform them of how the events played out, although he would leave out the fact that he saw the Whills. After this, Anakin would be sent on a side mission with Rex where he would help him find and save a clone who they thought was long gone, but in reality, he was just captured by the Separatists and was used for his intelligence. And after saving Echo, Echo would decide to join the Bad Batch. And instead of feeling reluctant to let Echo join them, Anakin instead felt at peace with how things played out and allowed him to leave. After arriving back on Coruscant, and some time later, however, Anakin would be called to meet with Yoda in his personal quarters, which, upon entering, Yoda would ask Skywalker what really happened on Obadiah. And Anakin, not wanting to keep what happened there a secret forever, would confess in Yoda about his visions with the Whills, and how he felt so much more powerful and in control of practically everything. After hearing this, Yoda would tell Skywalker about his experience with the Whills, and how they hold the key to life after death, but only for those who are willing to learn. But before they could continue on their conversation, Anakin would be called to the Chancellor's office, which Yoda did find a little annoying, but he would allow Anakin to leave, but asked him to stop by if he had any other questions. As Anakin entered the office of Palpatine, Anakin suddenly felt a very dark presence all around him, and as he looked around, he could sense the dark side in all of the artifacts that the Chancellor had collected. But none of that even compared to the Chancellor himself. As Anakin walked in, he could sense the evil and dark side pulsing from the old man. And feeling through the Force, Anakin realized that Palpatine was using the Force to cloak the dark side and to hide his yellow eyes. Realizing that the Chancellor was indeed a Sith, Anakin would lunge at Palpatine, lightsaber ignited, and would demand that Palpatine would stand down and surrender. Palpatine would look around in confusion. What on Coruscant was Anakin doing? But after a second, Palpatine saw in Anakin's eyes that the boy had finally found out what his true identity was. But how he was even able to do that was beyond Palpatine. All he knew now was that he needed to be very careful if he wanted to secure Anakin as his apprentice. As he paced around his office, Palpatine would pull on Anakin's heartstrings, saying how the Jedi could have saved his mother, and yet they did nothing, and would say that was the Jedi who lived in a glorious palace and while the people suffered in the galaxy. To which Anakin would push back, saying how the Jedi's primary goal was to help the people, and that was a way of the Sith to hurt others for their own personal gain. And after hearing those words, Palpatine finally had enough and said, "If you do not join me, your dear wife Padme and your unborn child will die." Staring at Anakin with a burning rage, Palpatine would yell at him to choose between ultimate power or death. But Anakin would not be fazed as he just stared back at the Sith with his piercing blue eyes, sensing that he would not be able to secure Anakin to his side and that he would not win in a 1v1 fight against the Chosen One, decided to make the risky decision of running away as he jumped out of the window. As he fell, he would quickly activate Order 66 across the entire galaxy. And while he knew it would not be nearly as effective as it could have been, he realized that if he didn't activate it now, he would not be able to later. And Anakin, sensing the change within the clones, would rush back to the temple and would lock it down before any clone had the chance to walk up the stairs. Unfortunately, while the temple might have been safe for the time being, the rest of the Jedi spread out across the galaxy were not, as thousands would die at the hands of the clones, including Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, thankfully, Depa Billaba, and many other Jedi Masters. Feeling all the pain and death that had occurred throughout the galaxy, Anakin would run to Yoda's quarters and would tell him everything. But before he could even say the first word, 10 Republic Venators would enter into the planet's atmosphere and would begin an orbital bombardment against the Jedi Temple. However, Anakin would sense this right in the nick of time and would use the Force to suspend the blaster fire for as long as possible. temple, and he would be able to do that for long enough where most of the Jedi were able to escape into the lower levels of the planet. Unfortunately though, there would still be roughly 1,000 Jedi stuck in the temple as it collapsed, killing all of them. But it wouldn't stop there, as Palpatine would automatically send hundreds of thousands of clones to search the entire planet to kill any Jedi there. But that would be very difficult to do so, as the Jedi had multiple safe havens hidden across the planet, and the one they were currently at was hidden deep within the temple, where they would regroup and try to craft a new plan. While this was happening, Palpatine would inform the people that the Jedi had betrayed them and they tried to kill him, but to not worry, as the threat of the Jedi would be dealt with in force. And he also would say that in order to secure the peace of the people, the Republic would be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire, and that he would become Emperor. And shortly following this speech, Palpatine would leave to Mandalore to force his former apprentice to join him once more, as even Palpatine realized that the amount of power that Anakin now possessed was far beyond what he could handle. And while at first Maul would try to run away from his master, Palpatine would not be patient and instead would hold his lightsaber at Maul's throat after a duel and would demand that Maul help him or he would die, to which Maul would reluctantly agree. After this, Palpatine would stage a peace talk between the CIS and the Republic, when in reality he really just needed General Grievous. In following the fake peace talks, Palpatine would secretly dismember all of the battle droids across the galaxy. While all of this conspired, Anakin worked tirelessly to help secretly evacuate the Jedi to safer locations and to try and locate Padme, although that was impossible as all of her communications were turned off. Becoming more desperate, Anakin would make the risky choice to leave their hidden location to find his missing wife. As Anakin flew to his wife's penthouse, Anakin was suddenly filled with a sense of dread, and he somehow knew that Padme wasn't there, but something else was. After racing to their room, Anakin was met with the hologram of his wife being held up in the air by Palpatine, who demanded that Anakin reveal the location of all the surviving Jedi, or else his wife and everyone on Coruscant would die. But before Anakin even had time to react, he was suddenly surrounded by dozens of clones and the former head of the Temple Guard. However, not hesitating, Anakin would quickly defend himself and would make short work of the clones and the Temple Guard, who was no match for the full power of Anakin Skywalker. And while it pained Anakin to kill the clones as they were all members of the 501st, Anakin would inform the hidden Jedi Order about what he had just found out and what Palpatine planned to do. But he would leave out the parts about his wife, and the Jedi Council, who was already developing a plan to escape Coruscant, decided that if they were going to save the rest of the Order from certain death, they would need to reveal themselves and draw the attention of the newly formed Empire. And so the next day, the Jedi Council, led by Anakin and Yoda, would lead the rest of the Order under the command of Kelleran Beck, and would give him the mission to evacuate all remaining Jedi from the planet to the safer location of Tython. Back in the ruins of the Jedi Temple, Palpatine could sense the Jedi approaching him. As he waited, he looked back on the past few decades, from the death of his master at his hands, to the start of the Clone Wars, till now Order 66, and possibly the death of the Jedi forever. All of his plans were finally coming to fruition. And while there was still a few thousand Jedi left alive, they would be no problem, as they would all be hunted down and defeated. And that even if some of them did survive, none of them would be strong enough to pose a serious threat to him or his empire. However, that would be put to the test when he turned around and saw Anakin, Yoda, and Mace Windu alongside the rest of the surviving Jedi Council. However, instead of being fearful of what would happen, Palpatine looked at them with eagerness, as he suddenly used the Force to collapse the floor around the Jedi, sending all the Jedi except for Anakin crashing down into the lower levels of the temple, where Maul, Grievous, and hundreds of clone troopers waited for them. Watching as the rest of the Jedi fell, Palpatine ignited his lightsaber and gave Anakin one last chance to join him. Anakin would turn on his lightsaber and would watch as Palpatine slowly circled him, as if testing his patience. But no longer the impatient and brash young man that he once was, Anakin instead would look at Palpatine and would deactivate his lightsaber and would kneel on the ground to meditate, to much of the confusion of Palpatine. But he would use this opportunity to try and cut off Anakin's head, but would miss as Anakin front flipped over him and would unleash his own fury of attacks. Underneath the temple, the Jedi would slowly get back up and try to let their eyes adjust to the darkness, but before they even had a chance to look at one another, they were instantly starting to defend themselves against Maul, Grievous, and the clones. Reacting in a split second, Yoda and Kit Fisto leaped towards Grievous, while Mace Windu and Saesee Tiin would take on Darth Maul, leaving the rest of the Jedi to take on the clones. As they started fighting, General Grievous laughed at the Jedi as he relentlessly pushed the two Jedi Masters back with his enhanced speed and agility, using two of his lightsabers to counter Yoda while the other two fought Fisto. But realizing that that would not be enough to kill the Jedi, he would change up his style as he grabbed Kit Fisto and threw him at Yoda, and was about to stab them both while they were both disoriented, when Yoda would force push him back into a wall and Fisto would use the distraction to cut off two of Grievous's hands. And while that was happening, Mace Windu and Saesee Tiin fought Maul. Mace would use Vaapad to feed off of Maul's anger to push him back, which would not have been possible without the help of Saesee Tiin, as he provided cover strikes and used all of Maul's weaknesses against him, as he barely managed to clip Maul's arm, making way for Mace Windu to cut Maul's lightsabers in half. Finally realizing that he was outmatched, Maul would demand that the clones fire at the two Jedi. Tired from just fighting Maul, Saesee Tiin would quickly get gunned down as Mace Windu tried to rebound as quickly as possible, deflecting the shots back onto the clones. Seeing an opening, Mace Windu would regroup with the other Jedi survivors and would get there just in time to see Agen Kolar, Coleman Kaj, and Stas Ali fall to the ground as they were ruthlessly shot to death. However, Mace would be able to get there quick enough just in time to save Shaak Ti from the clones. And above all this, while this was happening, Anakin and Palpatine exchanged a fury of blows. Their clash of their lightsabers echoed throughout the ruins. However, it quickly became evident that Palpatine was tiring, while Anakin seemed to only grow stronger with each and every strike. Sensing his advantage, Anakin would deliver a powerful kick to Palpatine's chest, followed by a forceful force push that sent the Sith Lord sprawling. Anakin advanced, ready to deliver the killing blow, when suddenly a surge of Force lightning struck him, knocking him to the ground as Count Dooku stepped out from the shadows, his hands crackling with the dark energy. And while Count Dooku poured all of his hate and power into this Force lightning, Anakin rose unfazed. The electricity, while coursing through his veins, it left him unscratched, as he just stared at Dooku as he absorbed all of the Force lightning, as he unleashed his own barrage of Force lightning at Dooku. However, his Force lightning, instead of blue, was a pure white, and he directed it at Palpatine. And Palpatine would narrowly dodge the onslaught and hissed at Dooku, commanding him to help him kill Anakin or face dire consequences. Driven by fear, Dooku hurled chunks at the temple at Anakin, attempting to create a distraction for his master, to which Palpatine would seize the opportunity to sneak up behind Anakin for a lethal strike. But Anakin would sense the Dark Lord's true intent and would perform a backflip and spin, slicing through the debris, and would use the momentum to launch himself at Palpatine. Their sabers clashed in a fierce lock as Anakin, with calculated precision, left his left side open, baiting Palpatine, and the Sith Lord would take the bait as he lunged forward, but Anakin would quickly sidestep and thrust his lightsaber into his back, and with a powerful kick, he sent Palpatine tumbling into the chasm where the other Jedi were, leaving only Dooku to face the wrath of the Chosen One. As the corpse of Palpatine fell, all he could see before he died was the true power of Anakin, as the Chosen One finally came to fulfill the prophecy. Looking up, Mace Windu saw the Sith Lord's body plummet and crash to the ground with a sickening thud. However, this brief distraction was costly, as a blaster shot seared his side, weakening but not killing him. Seizing the moment, Maul would lunge at him, his lightsaber poised to his strike, but was violently hurled into a wall by the forceful impact of General Grievous's body, flung by Yoda. Wasting no time, Yoda would engage both enemies, while Kit Fisto swiftly joined the fray. And while Maul deeply hated Grievous for killing his mother, he realized that both of their survivals depended on each other, so he would reluctantly help the cyborg back to his feet and would give him his spare lightsaber, just in time as Mace Windu, Fisto, and Yoda launched a coordinated assault against them. Yoda confronted Grievous head-on, while Mace launched an attack from behind, while Fisto took on Maul. The battle raged fiercely, but while this would have been an easy fight otherwise, the Jedi found themselves quickly being overwhelmed by the relentless attacks of the clone troopers. Sensing that if nothing changed they would all die, Yoda made the fateful decision as he allowed Grievous to strike him across the chest, creating an opening for Mace to deliver a decisive blow. With a swift strike, Mace Windu severed both of General Grievous's legs and then decapitated him. As Mace rushed over to Yoda's side, he would witness the fall of Kit Fisto, as Maul stood over the falling Jedi, bloodlust gleaming from his eye, ready to kill another Jedi. Back to Anakin. Anakin was quickly overpowering Dooku, but while he could have easily killed him, Anakin wanted to help him return to the light, and so he would pry at Dooku, reminding him of Qui-Gon and how this isn't what he would have wanted. Dooku, however, didn't want to listen. After all, his death could have been prevented if the Jedi would have listened to him. But seeing how Anakin was fighting, not with the intent to kill or harm him, but rather with the goal of helping him, Dooku realized that maybe he was on the wrong side after all. He had always had doubts about the dark side of the Force, but he has always had the fear of Palpatine to force him to stay in the dark side. But with his master dead, there was nothing holding him back, and so reluctantly he would turn off his lightsaber and would apologize to Anakin for everything he had done, and he would tell Anakin that it was time for him to make things right, as he jumped down to kill the last remaining Sith, and he would do so right in time as Maul was raising his lightsaber to kill Mace Windu, but would be stopped as he was cut in half, only this time vertically. Looking down at the lifeless corpse of Maul, Dooku felt a sense of happiness, killing the one who killed his apprentice all those years ago. But feeling like the battle wasn't over yet, he would help Mace Windu and the surviving Jedi to finish off the clones. After finishing off the remaining clones, Mace Windu, Dooku, and Shaak Ti would climb out of the temple just in time to bear witness of the first of 30 ships carrying the Jedi to jump to light speed. Except while this would have been a great sight to see, something felt terribly off. Anakin sensed that something terrible was about to happen. In seconds later, dozens of Imperial Star Destroyers jumped out of light speed. It managed to destroy half of the remaining ships and even started an orbital bombardment on the city. And while the Jedi looked up there helplessly, Anakin sensed that this was his moment to save the lives of trillions. As Anakin would use his full power and with just the Force alone would cause all of the Star Destroyers to implode on themselves simultaneously, saving trillions of lives. But before anyone can congratulate Anakin, he had already left to make his way to Palpatine's office where he saw his wife chained up in a cage, beaten but not dead. Next to her was 2 infants, a boy and a girl. And after getting Padme out of there, Anakin would rush her to the nearest medical facility where they would get her back to full health. And while he was waiting, he would be able to finally spend some quality time with his new children. But as he looked into the eyes of the boy, who he would decide to name Luke, he realized that as long as there was a trace of the Sith, they would always return. And realizing that there was only one way he could end the cycle, he'd make his way to Padme and would say goodbye to her, realizing what he needed to do. And while Padme may not have been fully conscious, she understood what Anakin was going to do and begged him not to do it. But not even she could deny that this was Anakin's destiny. And so Anakin would kiss her and the children goodbye, and with a tear in his eye, he would make his way to the Jedi Temple, as there was still one last loose end he had to tie up. Making his way down the destroyed temple steps into the very bottom of the temple, there he saw it. A Sith shrine that had been letting the dark side bleed out for over the past 1,000 years. Anakin sensed the dark side pulsing and emanating through it, and so he would climb to the very top of it and would enter a meditation-like state where he would communicate with the wheels one last time and allowed himself to become one with the Force. And unleashing all of his power, he would cleanse the galaxy of the dark side forever, destroying every dark side artifact and cleansing everything else, finally fulfilling the prophecy by destroying the Sith for good alongside the dark side and by bringing balance to the Force forever. What if Anakin Skywalker left the Jedi Order with Ahsoka Tano from the POV of Anakin? Our story begins in the Jedi High Council chamber room, where Anakin stood in complete disbelief as he watched as Ahsoka refused to rejoin the Order. This shocked Anakin, as he finally now fully digested of the full extent of which Ahsoka had been feeling. While he knew without a shadow of a doubt that the Jedi Council was far from perfect, he just couldn't wrap his head around Ahsoka leaving. But before he could say anything in protest, she was gone. Looking over to Yoda and Obi-Wan, he was surprised to see that they had a look on their face as if they already knew what Anakin was going to do. And so Anakin would simply just nod at them and would say, "I wish this could have ended differently," as he left the room to catch Ahsoka. As he finally caught up with her, she was already on the steps of the Jedi Temple, about to leave. However, before she could take her next steps, Anakin called out to her, saying that he was going with her. As she turned around, she just looked at him with a face of shock. Why on Coruscant would he leave the Jedi Order? He was a poster Jedi and one of the best generals they had. While at first Ahsoka rejected him joining her, Anakin persisted, saying how he already had a place for her to stay at, and that she did not have to do this whole journey of hers alone. While the offer did sound nice to Ahsoka, she couldn't do this to Anakin. This was his life. But before she could protest anymore, Anakin was already leading the way, and soon they'd be arriving at Padme's personal residence. Anakin decided that now was as good a time as any to let Ahsoka in on his little secret, that being he actually had a wife. And while Anakin at first thought Ahsoka would be completely dumbfounded by this, when he looked back at her after telling her, he saw that she already knew or at least had her suspicions about the whole thing. Whatever the case was, it didn't matter now, and after Padme returned home, she was surprised to see Ahsoka there with Anakin. And not knowing that Ahsoka left the Jedi Order, she automatically pretended to be friends with Anakin and referred to him as Master Jedi. But Anakin quickly stopped her and filled her in on everything that had happened. And while Padme had known of everything that happened with Ahsoka and the Jedi Temple bombing, after all, she had been the personal representative of Ahsoka, she was still deeply saddened and shocked by everything that had occurred. However, she couldn't deny that she was very happy to see them all right. And while this was occurring, back at the Jedi Council, the Council held an emergency meeting in regards to Anakin and Ahsoka leaving. This was not good for them. He was one of their best generals by far and their prophesied chosen one. While Obi-Wan did understand why Anakin and Ahsoka would want to leave the Order, it still hurt him very much to let them leave. Anakin was like a brother to him and Ahsoka a sister, but he could not let his emotions get in the way. After the meeting concluded, it was decided that the 501st Legion would combine with the 212th Battalion under the leadership of Obi-Wan, which would take some time getting used to, but the results were very beneficial as the two groups worked very well together as a joint force. Across the skyline as this was occurring, Palpatine could sense the shift in the Force and became very angry. This was not part of the plan. While he needed Ahsoka to leave, he also needed Anakin to stay. And while this would profusely alter his plan, this wasn't nothing he was unprepared for. So to counter this, Palpatine would make the risky decision to jumpstart part of his grand plan and would order the CIS to launch some more offensive attacks to weaken the Republic. And while he was doing this, he also put his main objective into plan. As the night sky of Coruscant cascaded across the horizon, Anakin and Padme were well asleep when Anakin's head was suddenly filled with a horrible nightmare of Padme dying, although the cause to him was unclear. Quickly waking up from that horrific dream, Anakin looked around and saw that his wife was still very alive, but he couldn't shake the feeling of a darkness looming over him. And while he tried not to let it affect him, that became increasingly difficult as the nightmares persisted over a few weeks. As the nightmares persisted, to the point of where Ahsoka and Padme noticed it, but no amount of prying could get to him. This came to the point of where Anakin felt as if he needed to tell someone about this. It was just eating him up on the inside. However, he felt like the only person who would understand him would be Palpatine. After all, he'd always been there for Anakin, even in the hardest of times. So Anakin would leave to go see Palpatine. Cut to Palpatine in his office, he could feel the young Skywalker approaching him. Good, just as he had foreseen. Entering his office, Palpatine would ask Anakin what was bothering him, and why would he leave the Jedi Order, to which Anakin would unload all of his pressure upon him, well, most of it, to which Palpatine fully embraced it and comforted Anakin, but also planted seeds of deception that maybe this was all the Jedi's fault. While Anakin denied that, he couldn't fully disagree with him. After all, the Jedi just blindly accused Ahsoka and even almost allowed her to be executed on a will. But still, he did have some faith in them, albeit very little. And right before Anakin left, Palpatine would take a risk and would tell Anakin that there were alternative uses of the Force. And Anakin, not knowing how to react, would simply thank him and would leave. Anakin, feeling a little better about himself, would head to his home. But later that night, the nightmares were different. While he still saw his wife dying, he saw that the Jedi were at the forefront of it. Although he could not make out who, all he knew that the Jedi were the cause of his wife's death in his dreams. However, then his vision shifted to him in a dark planet with a temple, an old one with a powerful potency of dark side energy. Upon waking up, Anakin knew that he needed to do something, and so he would contact an old friend of his, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who, while still tired from just waking up, as it practically was at the crack of dawn, he was glad to see his old friend, but was sad to see him in such a condition. Anakin, though, would just ask Obi-Wan if the Jedi would ever kill someone if they deemed him a threat, to which Obi-Wan, confused by such a question, would reply with that's not how the Jedi operated, and that they would always look for an alternative route. However, before Obi-Wan could ask Anakin what was going on, Anakin suddenly turned off his comm and would jump into hyperspace. Looking in the distance, Obi-Wan could sense that Anakin was deeply troubled by something. Bringing this to Master Yoda, he would also find this greatly disturbing, but would say that they would need to trust in Anakin. Sitting in his office, Palpatine sensed that everything was going according to plan. Palpatine would implicate his next steps of his plan after this, the next ones including Ahsoka. Back on the battlefield of things, the Republic noticed that the Separatists were starting to act more aggressive as they started to launch multiple counteroffensive on many planets that were seemingly Republic safe, which would lead to an increase in Republican casualties as well as Jedi. But they would not falter as they continued pressing in on the war. But this was increasingly difficult without the support of Anakin and Ahsoka. Cutting back to Anakin Skywalker, after being in hyperspace for a while, he felt as if he was approaching the place he needed to go. But before jumping out of hyperspace, he felt a great sadness within his wife and would realize that he was in some sort of trance and quickly would snap out of it, which upon breaking out of this trance, he would realize that he was starting to grow distant from his wife and from Ahsoka. Heading back to Coruscant, Anakin would reunite with his wife as he tried to explain everything that had been going on, and as he did this, Ahsoka would enter the room looking as if she had just returned from some sort of fight, but that didn't matter, as he had a very important question to ask her. At first, he reminded her of all that they'd been through, and through it all, she had always been there for him and Padme, and so he would ask her if she would like to be legally taken under their protection as a sort of adoption, and without even thinking about it, she automatically said yes. She had already viewed them as a sort of family in a way to her, as she had never actually had an official family that she knew of, so this was a dream come true for her. And after this, they would celebrate the night away, and for the first time in what seemed like months, Anakin had a night without nightmares. While this was occurring, Palpatine sensed all of this to the Force. This was not part of his plan. Something needed to be done. As long as Padme lived, Anakin would always be held back. Same thing with the Togruta, although he had already tried killing her with an assassin, but seeing how he hadn't heard from them yet, he knew that they had most likely failed. But even with all of this against him, he still had a plan. Later in the week, the nightmares returned, but this time they were much worse. Even when awake, they still haunted him. But with Padme and Ahsoka next to his side, he knew that he'd be able to manage them. But that would be put to the test when Ahsoka was sent away on a mission, and Anakin was out fixing C-3PO, and while he was out, he suddenly felt a great pain in his head as a Force vision came to him, one of suffering and death. Although this time, it wasn't just in his head, it was a feeling throughout the Force, as he sensed something terrible was happening within the Chancellor's office. And that's when Anakin realized a meeting was being held there, a meeting that Padme was attending. Fearing that his nightmares might finally be coming to fruition, Anakin raced across the crowded skyline as he flew dangerously across the lanes, and then he suddenly felt a surge of death, as if someone who was very close to him was violently killed. Quickly landing in front of the Senate building, Anakin raced through the corridors, his heart pounding as he approached approached Palpatine's office. As Anakin busted through the doors, he was greeted with a scene that was a nightmare. Bodies of guards and senators laid sprawled across the floors, their lifeless forms bearing unmistakable marks of a lightsaber. Anakin's thoughts immediately leapt to Count Dooku, but his blood ran cold when he saw who was standing over the mutilated body of Palpatine, Mace Windu. Mace Windu, his face grim with resolve, and his lightsaber poised for a killing blow. "The oppression of the Sith will never return," Mace declared, his voice as sharp as his blade. "Your rule is at an end." But before Mace could deliver his final strike, Anakin intervened, his own lightsaber igniting with a furious snap hissed as his blade blocked the blow. Mace's focus wavered, his attention momentarily diverted to the sudden appearance of the young Skywalker. But that was all the opportunity Palpatine needed, and with lightning speed, the old man lashed out, kicking Mace in the chest, and sent him stumbling back. And in a flash of malevolent power, Palpatine unleashed a torrent of force lightning that crackled through the air, striking Mace with a searing intensity. The energy soared through his body, burning him from within. But Mace's will was unyielding. With a desperate effort, he raised his lightsaber and deflected the deadly bolts. As he cried out to Anakin, his voice strained and pleading. However, Anakin's mind was elsewhere. His gaze drifted to the side, where his world shattered in an instant. Lying lifelessly on the floor was Padme, her still form surrounded by the chaos of death and destruction. The sight of her body twisted his heart into a knot of agony. Palpatine, ever the manipulator, seized the moment. "The Jedi killed her," he hissed at him, his voice dripping with venom. "They killed her as they killed the others, the senators, everyone. This was their doom." Anakin's vision blurred with an intensity of emotions, rage, anger, grief. In a heartbeat, he turned, his blade a blur as he drove it through Mace Windu's chest. The Jedi Master gasped, but no words could escape his lips before the light of his eyes faded. Mace crumbled to the ground, lifeless. Staggering, Anakin made his way to Padme's side, collapsing by her, his heart breaking as he held her in his arms. The reality of what he had done crashed down on him like a wave, but there was no turning back. Slowly, Palpatine rose to his feet, his expression one of calculated satisfaction. "This," Palpatine said with his voice a dark whisper, "was all part of the Jedi's grand scheme. They have betrayed you, Anakin. They have betrayed all of us. But you have a chance for revenge, for justice." Rising to his feet, Palpatine ordered Anakin to follow him. But before leaving, he ordered Mas Almeida to cover up the whole thing and not let anyone know what had truly happened there. As Anakin and Palpatine boarded his ship, they sliced through hyperspace, but Anakin couldn't even focus what was going on. All Anakin could think about was that the Jedi killed his wife, and once again, he couldn't stop the death of the people he loved the most. Palpatine, sensing that Anakin was very vulnerable, would use this opportunity to mold Anakin and to reinforce his thoughts that the Jedi were responsible. He would tell Anakin that the Jedi have failed everything they've ever stood for, and that they grew weaker every day as they let their ego and hubris grow. The Sith, however, remained strong, and that they were never truly defeated, and then pulled out his ultimate card, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, and how he could even save the people he loved when they were already dead, which was not entirely true. Anakin looked up and demanded to know more, as he used the Force to lift Palpatine into the air, but realizing that he was choking the man who could be the only possibility of saving Padme, would let him go. And after setting Palpatine on the ground, Palpatine would look at Anakin and would say that if he wanted to save Padme, he would need to go down a darker path. And before long, Anakin would almost fully embrace the dark side. Once they had reached the location, that being the ancient Sith planet of Malachor, Palpatine finally began his training of Anakin. Back at the Jedi Temple, Yoda was meditating when he suddenly felt a great, terrible pain, as if the balance of the Force was greatly thrown in turmoil. And then he remembered. He had sent Mace to check in on the Chancellor and gather information on the newest revelations, but he still hadn't returned. And even worse, Yoda couldn't sense him through the Force. Afraid of what this meant, Yoda would contact Obi-Wan and an old friend, Ahsoka, to help him on this case. And while Ahsoka wasn't a Jedi, he had a feeling that she would be able to help. Back on Malachor, Palpatine used the same methods he used on Darth Maul all those years ago, making Anakin breathe in the ashes of dead Jedi and Sith. furthering him to the dark side. And then begins Anakin's next challenge, Palpatine himself. While Anakin at first thought they would be learning lightsaber fighting, he was instead forced to learn dark side abilities, such as Dune Mok and Force Lightning, both of which Palpatine employed on Anakin relentlessly, nearly killing him on several occasions. However, on the rare occasions that they would do lightsaber training, Palpatine wouldn't hold back, as he would continuously prove his superiority over Anakin at any chance he could get. And yet, even with all of this, Palpatine feared that there was still a bit of good left in Anakin, so to crush it once and for all, Palpatine would, for the next 2 weeks straight, would force Anakin into a terrible Force nightmare, one of which he could not wake up from. In this, be forced to relive all of his worst nightmares, from the abuse of slavery, to the death of his mother, to the loss of his arms, to now the loss of his wife. Anakin couldn't take it, as he finally cracked, and once the nightmare was over, Palpatine smiled as he stood over the once great Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, who was now ready for his final test, one that would put everything on the line, the test of a true Sith Lord. Anakin must face himself. As Anakin slipped into a deep meditative-like trance, his mind was violently thrust into a nightmare's vision. The familiar halls of the Jedi Temple materialized before him, only now they were engulfed in flames, and blood soaked the floors, the air thick with the rancid stench of burning flesh. Dead Jedi lay strewn across the floors like broken dolls, their lifeless eyes reflecting the horrors that had unfolded. And then he sought a spectacle from his past, the former Anakin Skywalker, valiantly defending his fellow Jedi from a monstrous mechanical beast, one with a dark resolve. The current Anakin strode forward without a hint of fear in his presence, his eyes locked onto the scene. With a mere thought, he seized control, force lifting the combatants into the air. The beast vanished into nothingness, followed swiftly by the other Jedi, leaving only the two Anakins, past and present, facing off against each other with a deadly silence. Without hesitation, Anakin launched himself at his former self, unleashing a torrent of Force lightning that crackled through the air, followed by relentless onslaughts of lightsaber strikes. Each blow was fiercer, more savage than the last, driving his weaker self back, exposing the pathetic remnant of who he used to be. This revelation fueled his fury, how weak he had been, how blind. His anger boiled over as he reached out with the Force and crushed his former self's throat. But not yet satisfied, he pulled him closer into a grueling, inevitable grip, and with a single decisive motion, Anakin's blade flashed through the air, severing the head of his past, and thus severing the final tie to the man that he once was. As the vision dissolved, only darkness remained, and with it, the rebirth of a true Sith Lord. Shooting awake, Yoda felt a great disturbance in the Force as he felt Anakin in such pain and suffering. It hurt Yoda beyond belief, but with Anakin out of contact, there was little he could do but wait. As Anakin slowly awakened from his vision, he immediately saw Palpatine standing over him with a horrifying grin. However, before Anakin could even say a word, Palpatine cut him off and proclaimed, the once great Anakin Skywalker had finally proven himself to the dark side. Searching through the Force, Palpatine opened his eyes and said, henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Vader. Rising from where he was, he thanked his master and made his way to the ship, and only then realized that he was holding his lightsaber in his hand the whole time, and when he ignited it, he realized that he'd finally bled his lightsaber, as it donned a crimson glow. As he made his way to his ship, Palpatine warned him that their fight was truly about to start, but before they left their planet, Palpatine would give Anakin a gift to help. Making their way towards Coruscant, it was decided that Palpatine would activate Order 66 and would call for a full invasion of Coruscant, and for that the clones and CAS to purge any other known Jedi location. And it was then decided that Palpatine would take on Yoda and some of the council members, and Anakin would take on the rest of the temple and would kill every Jedi there. None shall live, not even the younglings. Feeling a great darkness ascend across the galaxy, Yoda was contacted by Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, who claimed to have found out what happened to the Senators and Mace Windu. But before they could continue, hundreds of Separatist warships entered the atmosphere, followed swiftly by hundreds of Republican Venators who began attacking them. But sensing that something was off, Yoda reacted in a split second as he raised the temple defenses. And while he reacted quick enough to stop all of the temple from being destroyed, he unfortunately was not fast enough to save it all. As in almost a split second, absolute hellfire rained down from the skies, destroying everything near and inside of the temple that wasn't protected. But Yoda, using his power, would suspend much of the orbital bombardment using the Force, and would send it right back at the Separatists and the Republic. Wasting no time, Yoda would gather all remaining Jedi and order them to evacuate the temple or to help fight off the attackers. Luckily, right as this was happening, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would jump out of hyperspace and would manage to meet up with Master Yoda and devise a plan. Slowly descending from the skies, Palpatine told Anakin that with the Jedi weakened, it was a perfect time for their extermination. As they landed, he told Vader that he is to work with General Grievous when killing the Jedi. As Palpatine turned to leave, Vader stopped him and asked him what he was going to do. Not turning back, Palpatine simply replied with, "Something I have long waited for." Walking up the temple steps, Vader could see all the destruction around the temple, and it fueled him as he wasted no time and ran into the temple. Cut to Palpatine as he finally arrived to the Senate chambers. Looking around in his office, he would sit down and would wait for his little green friend to arrive. Thankfully, it didn't take long, as only mere moments later, Yoda walked in. Looking down at the old green frog, Palpatine spoke with malice. "You're too late to save your dear Republic in Jedi Order. They all shall fall under my hand, and the Sith will once again return." But before he could continue his sentence, Yoda force-pushed him and simply replied, "Not if anything to say about it, I have," as he lunged toward the Dark Lord and entered a duel of the fates. Back in the Jedi Temple, Anakin quickly found General Grievous as he already cut down several Jedi Masters. After finishing off the last of the Jedi, Grievous turned around and began to greet Vader, but before he could even mutter a single word, Vader lifted him up into the air and crushed him to a pulp in a split second, ending the cyborg's life without a second thought. Looking down at the heap of junk, Anakin left it and continued on. As he made his way through the temple with his new suit Palpatine gave him and his newly bled kyber crystal, Vader ruthlessly cut down any and all Jedi who stood before him. None even held a match to his power. He proved as much when he killed a Jedi Master Sindralik in only 3 lightsaber strikes, followed swiftly by killing all the remaining council members inside of the temple. Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Depa Billaba, it didn't matter. They were all killed under Darth Vader's power. His speed was unmatched even for a Jedi, and his enhanced strength from the suit made him an impossible target. While many of the weaker Jedi had already been evacuated, that didn't mean that their fate was any better. Most of them were simply shot down the moment they were seen. However, thanks to the heroics of Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, they managed to save many of the hidden Jedi. But anyone who hadn't been saved, including many Masters, Council members, were all slaughtered without mercy. Back in the Jedi Temple, clone reinforcements had just arrived and helped Anakin clear out much of the remaining temple floors. But unbeknownst to them, while they had been clearing out the Jedi Temple, they were secretly being followed, and any clone who was left behind or just unwatched was quickly killed by the shadows following them. This would go on until it was just Vader remaining. And that's when he finally felt who was following him, and his suspicions were proven correct when he turned around and saw who it was. Back in the skies of Coruscant, the battle ensuing was a very confusing one. On one hand, the Republic and Separatists were working together to destroy the Jedi, but on the other hand, they were also fighting each other to the death. As the battle continued, the Republic began pushing the Separatist forces back, as without the command of Count Dooku or General Grievous, they were essentially fighting blind. However, the Republic wasn't doing so hot either, as without the help and command of the Jedi, they were taking massive casualties. But they pushed on, taking down the CIS capital ship. Back down at the crumbling Jedi Temple, Vader stared at Ahsoka and Obi-Wan with such anger and bloodlust that neither of them even thought it was possible that it could have been Anakin. But sensing through the Force, their deepest fears were confirmed, as Vader simply said, "The age of the Jedi have passed. You cannot defeat my master." Pushing back, the former friends of Anakin tried reaching out to him, but nothing was getting through, as he just stared at them and then spoke softly for Padme. As the crimson blade flared to life, Vader marched forward. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, knowing that there was no other alternative, ignited their lightsaber, their blue and green blades a sharp contrast against the red. Vader's relentless assault began, his blows fueled by superhuman strength, each swing of his crashing down into their defenses with the force of a thunderstorm. Though his suit made him appear bulky, he was more than compensated with his sheer strength and the dark side. Suddenly, red lightning shot from Vader's hand, striking Obi-Wan like searing daggers. He fell to his knees, his mind scrambled by the pain, unable to focus as Vader marched towards him. But before Vader could deliver a killing blow, Ahsoka intervened and rammed into him, flipping over him, her blade barely grazing the back of his helmet. As Obi-Wan staggered back to his fate, he would join Ahsoka in a desperate attempt to hold the Dark Lord at bay. But Lord Vader was too powerful, as each strike they made was effortlessly deflected. Each attempt to counter was met with a crushing force. To make matters worse, Vader taunted them with cruel mockery, his words cutting deep as his his blade. But still, they fought on, giving everything they had. Growing impatient, Vader unleashed a powerful force push, sending Obi-Wan crashing through the temple walls, knocking him unconscious, and leaving Ahsoka to face Vader alone. With a heavy heart, Ahsoka looked into the eyes of her former master, pleading him to remember who he was. She tried to remind him of all that they'd been through, how this was not what Padme would have wanted, but Vader's response was a thunderous roar, blaming the Jedi for his death. He stated, "They saw her and the Chancellor as a threat and killed her. I could have saved her, but I wasn't strong enough. But now I am. No Jedi or Sith will ever stop me again." Tears welled in Ahsoka's eyes as he whispered, "This isn't you, Anakin. My master could never be as vile as you." Vader's voice was cold and unfeeling. Anakin was weak. I am what remains. Ahsoka's heart broke as she realized that her friend was truly gone. With a final, desperate resolve, she launched herself at Vader, attempting to strike him down, but he was ready, countering her each and every move with a savage precision. She managed to land a blow to his leg, but it only fueled his fury. As he locked sabers once more, with a sudden burst of dark side energy, Vader unleashed lightning upon her, sending her crashing into the ground in agony. Obi-Wan, regaining consciousness, saw Ahsoka's broken form, Vader towering over her, lightning still pouring from his fingertips. With a cry of defiance, Obi-Wan lifted Vader into the air and slammed him into the wall with the Force, then leapt at him for one last desperate battle. They clashed like titans, Obi-Wan using every ounce of his strength to keep up with Vader's brutal assault. And there was somewhere deep inside of Vader that did not want to do this, but that fragment of Anakin was buried beneath so much torment and rage. In the chaos of their duel, Obi-Wan saw an opportunity and slashed across Vader's chest. Unfortunately though, the strike of Obi-Wan's was very sloppy, giving Darth Vader the opportunity to flip Obi-Wan over and use his momentum against him. And in one swift moment, Vader ripped the lightsaber from Obi-Wan's grasp and drove it into his gut. Ahsoka screamed in horror as Obi-Wan fell, another Jedi lost to the darkness. Her grief turned to fury, and with a primal scream, she attacked Vader with all of her might. Her strikes were relentless, forcing him back as she delved deeper into the dark side, as she tore through his defenses. But as she prepared to deliver the final killing blow, she stopped and realized this wasn't what she was meant to do. And Vader seized the opportunity and struck her with a devastating punch through her liver, then kicked her in the face. Dizzy and disoriented, Ahsoka tried to rise again, but stopped as she felt a burning pain in her back, as she looked down and saw Vader's blade piercing her. As she fell, a sudden clarity washed over Vader. Anakin resurfaced, as he looked down and saw that he once again failed to protect those who he loved. Horrified by what he had done, he threw his lightsaber aside and cradled Ahsoka in his arms, realizing that in his quest to save those who he loved, he had once again failed. This time, there was no one to blame but himself. Weeping in sorrow for everything that he had done, he looked over and saw a quick burst of green and red lights flashing from outside. Realizing that it was all Palpatine's plan, it was the only plan that he had ever had. Anakin finally came to the conclusion that Palpatine never wanted to help Anakin, he only wanted to help himself. Anakin was now filled with rage, but this time he knew just what he had to do. As Palpatine stood triumphantly over the defeated Grandmaster, he looked over and saw his apprentice walk over. How poetic. The former Chosen One would be the perfect person to kill the last Jedi Master. But before he could even say a word, Anakin shot a blast of white Force lightning at Palpatine, then grabbed him by the throat, looking into the eyes of the devil that had caused all of his pain and suffering, and crushed the throat of Sidious, ending the Sith Lord's life. Shucking the Sith Lord's body aside, Anakin would look over to Yoda, and he would realize that he was still alive. However, Anakin just couldn't bring himself to confront Yoda, so instead he would make his way to the top of the destroyed Jedi Temple and would use the Force to crush the remaining Separatist ships and would use Palpatine's comm leak to revoke Order 66. After this, he left into a shuttle and jumped into the core of the galaxy, where he would spend the rest of his days in solitude, but in self-healing, on the planet of Tython. And there he would finally learn how to forgive himself, but would never be heard from again. What he did to save the Jedi and stop the Clone Wars would spread across the galaxy, as when he managed to crush the remaining Separatist warships, he managed to crush much of the remaining Separatist forces across the galaxy. And this would spread across the galaxy as became a hero to all. And this would mostly be thanks to Yoda, who would see Anakin using his power to break free from the dark side and see him righting all of his wrongs. But the horrors that had happened within inside of the temple would haunt the survivors of the Jedi Purge. which numbered at around a few thousand. But they would eventually learn to forgive Anakin and what he had done. While the Jedi were eventually able to rebuild their order, they would never fully re-enter the Republic, seeing how that was the main cause of all their problems, and instead would stay in the Outer Rim, providing help where they were truly needed. And in the Outer Rim, the renegade Sith Lord Darth Maul would eventually die due to sabotage under his Mandalorians, and Mandalore would once again fall under the control of Bo-Katan Kryze. What if Mace Windu survived the fall? Let's skip the intro and get straight into the video. As Mace Windu fought the now-revealed Sith Lord Palpatine, his mind flooded with questions. How did this go unnoticed by the Jedi? How had they strayed so far from their former glory that they allowed a Sith Lord to rise to the ranks of Chancellor? As his mind raced, managed to push the Sith Lord onto the ground, and before he could deliver the final blow and kill the Sith Lord, Anakin rushed into the room to stop him. What was he doing here? Mace told him to stay in the council room. He'll have to sort that out later, but something seemed different about Anakin. He seemed split, as if he was torn between two sides. What could he possibly be torn about? Palpatine needed to die. The war was almost over. Palpatine, after all, was the reason the war even happened and caused the death of countless Jedi as well as clones. But before Mace could thrust his lightsaber and kill the unarmed Sith, he suddenly felt a burning hot agony in his arm, and then that was sidelined by the relentless barrage of Force lightning coming from Palpatine. As his entire body started to boil from the scorching heat of the lightning, he was thrown out the window and felt a sudden cool rush of air on his scorched skin. As he rapidly plummeted to the streets of Coruscant, he would see what he thought was a landing platform through his blurred vision, and seeing as this was his only chance at survival, would use what remained of his diminished strength to fall onto it, and by the will of the Force, he made it. While he didn't remember much, someone had to load him onto the ship, and he would drift in and out of consciousness for the next few hours. And from what he could gather, he was on this ship, a Naboo one from the looks of it, and it seems as if they were flying through Coruscant. Then he heard blaster fire as they landed on another platform, and a figure with a floating canister of some sort approached him. But before he could register the man's face, his exhaustion overtook him as he finally slept. But not even his dreams gave him peace. His mind was plagued by the death of everyone he knew. Plo Koon, Stas Ali, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Jar Tapal were all dead. The pain was unbearable, but it slowly oozed away as a gel-like substance slowly engulfed him. Mace was too weak to resist it, and he completely gave in. Eventually, though, after what felt like an eternity, Mace would regain his consciousness again. As he was put onto a bed, he would see that he was somewhere with large, rolling green hills. Naboo, if he had to guess. But it was hard to tell. His vision in one of his eyes was still very blurry, and as Mace gathered himself more, he felt as if something was off, as if something was missing. And then he remembered that Anakin did cut his hand off. Mace never truly liked Anakin. He was too unpredictable and stubborn, and this only furthered his suspicions. But it was all too late. He allowed a Sith Lord to wipe out the Jedi Order once again. How could they have been so blind? Mace had failed the Jedi Order. Mace had failed the Jedi Order and everyone he ever cared about. Mace was so blinded by his thoughts that he didn't even notice the figure next to him until he spoke. The figure didn't say much, but it was all Mace needed to hear. The Jedi were gone, and those who remained were now the #1 enemy of the galaxy, set to be terminated. The Clone Wars were over, and the Republic was now an empire. The democracy they fought so hard for was now only a memory. This hit Mace like a spear, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, Mace cried. How could the Republic, or now the Empire, just turn on them? The Jedi Order were their protectors for tens of thousands of years, but the Jedi have failed. He failed. He was the reason this all happened. And slowly his sadness turned into anger. He should have won that fight if it wasn't for Anakin walking in and screwing everything up. He would have killed the Sith Lord. Was he unarmed? Yes, and that did go against his code, but he ultimately had no choice. His thoughts, however, were soon interrupted by the figure, who asked him what they should do. As Mace looked over, he realized who his savior was. The Jedi Dean known as Kelleran Beck. Mace would spend the next few days recovering from his duel with Palpatine with Kelleran, who managed to escape the temple raiding. Another thing that deeply angered Mace, the clones raiding the Jedi temple and slaughtering the younglings. And over those days, Mace would realize that his vision in his eye was not getting better. So to combat this, Mace would learn how to fight with basically one eye and a new robotic arm. It was difficult, but Mace had been through worse. Even though he was the next Jedi set to be the Grand Master, or would have been if it wasn't for the Sith interfering, he realized that he still had a lot to learn from Kelleran, and also had a lot to teach the youngling named Grogu. He mostly spent his time with Yoda and Yaddle. Makes sense, they both share the same species, whatever that was. Despite being some of the most wanted people in the galaxy, some people did know of their existence on Naboo, such as Bail Organa and Senator Binks. Mace never grew to be close with Bail Organa, but he did know Jar Jar Binks. He was actually quite familiar with him. They had gone on a few missions together and even helped him stop the reincarnation of the Night Sister leader Mother Talzin. But any respect Mace Windu had for the Gungan was shattered. After all, it was Binks' fault that Palpatine got the emergency power and became this self-proclaimed emperor from what he heard. But he could not deny that without the help of the Gungan, he most likely would have died. As their training continued, Mace would regain his former strength and even become a little stronger than he was before, but as it would turn out, his eye was completely useless. It simply did not heal or recover. The youngling was also making excellent progress, and after a few months or so on the planet, the three Jedi would decide that it was time for the Jedi Order to return to the galaxy, and they would set off on a journey to rebuild the Jedi. But before they could start training anyone, they needed a home base, and thanks to both Kelleran and Mace Windu both being high-ranking Jedi, they knew of a few places to check out that not even many of the council members knew about. But after traveling to many worlds, they decided on the Outer Rim world of the the Verlin Nexus would be the perfect spot for the new Jedi Order. It was far from the rest of the galaxy, but close enough where they can make a few round trips. The planet itself was a dense jungle world with many caves. It also housed the remains of an old Jedi temple and forgotten knowledge. The old Jedi temple, though, would be incredibly difficult to build, and in fact would have been impossible if it wasn't for Mace reaching out to the natives who used to help the Jedi back in the Old Republic. The natives were known as the Surmadan, who were small but strong people and knew just how to remove the overgrown plant life from the temple in a matter of a few days. It also helped that the temple was relatively small, maybe big enough to house a little over 500 Jedi. And after rebuilding most of the temple, Mace Windu would set out to start gathering the first recruits to the new Jedi Order, while Kelleran stayed with Grogu to explore the Jedi temple remains, to look for any forgotten Jedi texts to find new ways to train the Jedi. But Mace Windu's task of finding new Jedi would prove a lot harder than he expected. Not only did most of the people now hate the Jedi, but the Jedi were also practically extinct. But by the will of the Force, soon after finding that out, Mace would meet a Force sensitive, but not the one he ever wanted to meet again. As it would turn out, the former Jedi Master Prosed Dibs, who tried to kill Mace Windu before the Jedi Purge, was something he called an Inquisitor and was tasked with hunting down and killing Jedi. This shocked Mace. He thought that if there's any Jedi that survived, they would just go into hiding. To find out that some of them willingly turned to the dark side was a whole new story. This brought back the same anger he felt when fighting Palpatine that he tried to control, but to no avail. It pulsed through his body and demanded that the 10th brother be killed. So he lunged at the so-called Inquisitor with all of his anger and struck with fast and heavy swings. This caught the Inquisitor off guard, who quickly went on the defensive. And as they fought, Mace gave in to his anger more and more until eventually the 10th brother grew exhausted from the fight and tried to escape. But the moment he tried to jump away, he felt a burning pain in his chest as a purple blade was ripped from it and flew back to its master's hand. As Mace regathered himself, the anger that overtook him slowly left him and realized it was a mistake going to Lothal. But he still felt there was something there calling him. He'll have to return again later. And after a few more weeks of searching the galaxy, he would come across a youngling who was cornered by a group of clone troopers. Mace, not wanting to let the dark side take control over him again, used a Jedi mind trick on them and made them leave. The young Jedi he rescued said his name was Caleb Doom. The boy said he was on the run after narrowly escaping Order 66, thanks to his dead master, who also was Mace Windu's former Padawan, Depa Billaba. It broke Mace Windu's heart to see this boy so scared. It also broke his heart to find out that his Padawan was dead. Shortly after rescuing the boy, he and Caleb would leave to go back to the Verlin Nexus, where Caleb would be safe and continue his training with Kelleran. But before departing again, Mace would warn Kelleran about the Inquisitor he encountered on Lothal and how there may be more of them. When Kelleran heard of this, he was just as shocked as Mace, if not more. Kelleran was the former Jedi Dean after all. He reassured Mace that they were safe on this planet and that it was unknown to the Empire. Staying hopeful, Mace would embark on his journey once again. As Mace traveled through hyperspace, he would suddenly feel a dark presence, almost as dark as Palpatine, but this one was familiar in all the wrong ways. As he looked into the Force, he could hear an almost robotic breathing as well as the shape that resembled a helmet. Despite this though, he couldn't just turn around and abandon his mission. There was something pulling him to this planet. As he landed on the planet, the dark presence he felt only increased, but he continued. He searched the city until he found what he thought he was looking for. A young girl, maybe 7 or 8 by the looks of it. But before he could reach her, she vanished, and through the hologram walked a new figure, a tall, menacing beast, whose breathing and helmet he saw in the vision. Another Inquisitor? Mace didn't think so. This one emanated the same dark energy he felt in hyperspace. Then the beast spoke, calling Mace by his name. How in the Force did this creature know who he was? And then the beast ran over to Mace and fought him. As they clashed blades, Mace realized that the style of this beast reminded him of Anakin. But that couldn't be possible. The Empire reported him dead, but they have lied before, so it wasn't out of their ballpark. But any suspicions he had about Anakin and the beast were confirmed when the beast spoke to Mace, reminding him about the fight in Palpatine's office and how Mace failed the Jedi Order. This confirmed to Mace that Anakin had turned to the dark side and now was the Emperor's puppet. Still shocked by what has become of the former Chosen One, Mace almost didn't realize that Anakin almost took off his head. Regaining his senses, Mace quickly dodged this strike and countered it. Even though Mace was trained to face any and all threats, this was unlike anything he's ever faced before. Anakin's attacks were strong and fast, and this form he was using was new to Mace. And just when it seemed as if Mace was about to gain the advantage due to the pod, 4 more Inquisitors would jump out and circle him. Realizing there's little chance of him making out of this encounter alive, and after barely making it to his ship, he quickly jumped into hyperspace, but not before some TIE fighters shot his hyperdrive. His mind flooded with thought. He knew Anakin had turned to the dark side, but the reports he saw on the HoloNet said he died in action. How and why was he in this suit? But Mace didn't have time to answer any of his questions. His hyperdrive was severely damaged while escaping the Empire, and was way too damaged to make it to the Verlin Nexus. But he could make it to the planet of Ryloth. But even there, Mace did not feel safe. The Empire has swamped the planet ever since the assassination of their senator. He had to make this quick. As Mace landed in a hangar bay, he was quickly met with a Rodian man, and without thinking, Mace used a Jedi mind trick on him and told him to repair and refuel his ship for free. As Mace left to gather more supplies, a hooded figure would bump into Mace and quickly walk away. Mace saw nothing of it until he realized that his lightsaber was missing. Mace, wasting no time, would search the entire city and with the help of the Force, track down the hooded figure who had stolen it. It was a young Twi'lek boy. He couldn't have been older than 14. The boy seemed petrified of Mace, not because he was caught, but rather that Mace was a Jedi, and Mace couldn't blame him. The Empire's put out so much propaganda that depicted the Jedi as these evil, power-hungry villains, and that everyone should view the Jedi as enemy number one. After retrieving his lightsaber, Mace was hoping to make a quick escape when he realized that the Force seemed relatively strong in the young boy, so Mace would pretend to leave, but instead observe the boy and his movements. And his suspicions were right. He seemed to have a higher jump than anyone without the Force could do. He could also call objects to his hand using just his mind. This was enough for Mace to confront the boy and asked him if he would join him on his journey. But the boy would quickly refuse his offer, just as a squad of new stormtroopers surrounded him. Not having enough energy to fight, Mace would force push them all away and jump into a ship and leave. After returning to the Verla Nexus, he would quickly be greeted by Kelleran and Caleb, who looked much better now. Mace would inform him of his discovery and stay on the Nexus for a few months to let things die down, and would personally train Caleb for a while. After those months were over, Mace would return to his original journey, and over the next few years, Mace would bring back multiple Force sensitives to be trained. While most of them were barely older than 7 years old and orphans, and had no idea on who or what the Jedi were, there were some Jedi Knights he found. Some of the Jedi he managed to track down were Baylan Skoll, who wasn't around any clones at the time of Order 66, Quinlan Vos of all people, and a Wookiee Jedi Padawan called Gungi. And over those few years, one of his most notable missions was on the planet of Lothal, where he finally found the source that was leading him there, a forgotten Jedi temple and a very young Force-sensitive boy called Ezra Bridger. While the boy may have been strong in the Force, it was the temple that led him there. It had many Jedi texts, holocrons, and lightsabers, but the thing that drove him there the most was a mural of 3 figures, and while Mace was no lore keeper, he knew for a fact that these 3 figures were the Father, the Daughter, and the Son, the Trinity of the Force. After gathering what he viewed as enough Jedi, Mace and Kelleran would both embark on the next quest, locating the exiled Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. After weeks of endless searching, they would find a clue that suggests the whereabouts of Obi-Wan, and after landing on the desert planet of Tatooine, they would quickly be greeted by someone named Owen Lars, who claimed to be in the cahoots with Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Ben as he called him. According to Owen, the only reason he's telling them about this is because he believes there's a possibility of the Empire coming to Tatooine and finding Obi-Wan and connecting him to his family. And at first, Mace was a little suspicious of Owen, but all of his suspicions would disappear when he finally saw Obi-Wan Kenobi, and after 8 long years, Obi-Wan and Mace Windu finally reunited. It was a bittersweet moment. It reminded Mace of the old days and all of his friends. After sitting down together, Obi-Wan would catch Mace and Kelleran up on what has happened to Anakin in the Jedi Order. After hearing all of this, Obi-Wan would question what they were doing there. Mace would reveal to him that they were rebuilding the Jedi Order and want his help. This would completely shock Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was starting to lose hope that anyone would ever stand up to the Empire, and as their conversation continued, they suddenly heard rounds of blaster fire, and as they ran outside, they saw a group of stormtroopers open fire on Owen and his wife. Without missing a beat, Obi-Wan would jump down and kill all of the troopers, but it was too late. Owen and his wife were dead. But the boy seemed to be fine, just unconscious and with a blaster mark on his left shoulder. Not life-threatening, but left untreated would become lethal. When Mace looked over to Obi-Wan, he noticed that Obi-Wan seemed incredibly upset and ashamed of himself. Without asking, Mace already knew Obi-Wan was sent there to protect the boy and his family, and he had just failed. As their ship took off into space, Obi-Wan insisted on going to Alderaan, claiming there was someone there he needed. During the trip to Alderaan, it was all quiet until Obi-Wan told Mace why they needed this boy and girl they were going to pick up. According to him, they were the children of Anakin Skywalker and Senator Padme Amidala, Luke and Leia Skywalker. This was a bombshell to Mace, but the more he thought about it, the more it did make sense. After meeting up with Bail on Alderaan, Mace filled him in on their situations and what happened, and Mace would agree to give Obi-Wan the girl, but he made him promise that they would be protected, and Obi-Wan would agree. And after this, they would leave. Mace and Obi-Wan would spend the next 10 years taking turns training Luke and Leia. But while they both were incredibly strong in the Force, more than Mace thought was possible, none of them connected to Mace more than the young boy from Lothal, Ezra, and Caleb. And after some time, Mace would take both of them on as his new Padawans. And for a while, things seemed to be at peace. And every month or so, they would send out a group of Jedi to look for more recruits. Most of the time, their search would yield no results, but sometimes they would get lucky. And now there was around 60 Jedi at the temple, and they even found Grandmaster Yoda on Dagobah thanks to Obi-Wan. But he refused to reclaim the rank of Grandmaster, and instead chose to just be a teacher to the younglings. As well as Yoda, they also found another Jedi survivor called Cal Kestis after his master Cere Junda was killed. As time progressed, there was no denying that the Empire needed to be stopped. They're slowly closing in on the Verla Nexus and also controlled almost the entire galaxy under the watchful eye of the Emperor. But this time, the Jedi weren't going to wait around for the Sith to strike first. Mace and Baylan had been studying the Emperor's patterns and found out that he was set to arrive on Lothal in the upcoming few days. This was the opportunity that they have been waiting for. For the past decade, Obi-Wan and Mace have been training every Jedi there on how to fight the Empire if they ever attack them or they chose to attack the Empire. Today was that day. As they prepared to go to Lothal, they would look up to the sky and see 3 Star Destroyers landing from hyperspace. Mace was in complete complete disbelief. This planet was supposed to be undetectable from the Empire, or at least give them a few more years, and because this was only a Jedi temple and an old one at that, and not a battle station, they had no anti-aircraft weapons, so all they could do was wait. But they didn't have to wait long, as dozens of landing shuttles descended from the sky and landed on the rough jungle terrain. And it wasn't long before hundreds of stormtroopers and purge troopers started to open fire, along with over a dozen Inquisitors charging the Jedi. But unlike the temple raiding, the Jedi were more prepared for this fight, even though they were caught off guard. Mace didn't focus on the troopers and left that to the other Jedi, but rather took on the 5 Inquisitors to stop them before they reached the younglings. While they certainly were stronger than the last time, it was not strong enough to stop Mace from killing 2 of them before he retreated into the trees. His blind eye made it hard for him to fully see his opponent and to parry every strike, but as he looked around with his good eye and saw the dead bodies of the Jedi, anger flowed through his veins one more time, and he welcomed it as he jumped back onto the Inquisitors with a new fury. On the other side of the temple, Obi-Wan was defending a group of Padawans with all of his might against the Purge and Stormtroopers. While the Stormtroopers were easy to deal with, the Purge Troopers were a whole new thing, and nearly killed Obi-Wan with their advanced training. But before he was taken down, Kelleran and Baylan jumped in to help him fend off the troopers and get the Padawans to the lower level of the temple, where they would be protected by Quinlan and 2 other Jedi Knights. After getting the Padawans to safety, a dark presence suddenly filled the planet as a caped demon known as Darth Vader walked out of his ship. And while this was occurring, Mace had managed to kill all but one of the Inquisitors and was about to finish her off when he was stopped by who Mace assumed was their leader. It was the old temple guard Mace had seen around the temple, and as if betraying his family wasn't enough, he'd become the so-called Grand Inquisitor and the head of hunting and killing Jedi survivors, besides Vader. While he certainly had far more training and experience than any other Inquisitor, it was not enough to match Mace. As they clashed blades, Mace would see out of the corner of his good eye what he thought was Obi-Wan Kenobi and 2 other Jedi fighting Darth Vader. This horrified Mace. He had seen what the Dark Lord was capable of. So after killing the Grand Inquisitor, Mace would run to aid his friends, but arrived just in time to see Kelleran get beheaded and Baylan get slashed across the chest, killing him almost instantly. But before Vader could kill Obi-Wan, Mace would jump in the way and block his lightsaber. 3 of the most powerful Force wielders in the galaxy would engage in a ferocious duel, and it seemed as if the light was about to prevail until the person they least expected to show up appeared. As Palpatine walked down the shuttle, he fired a powerful blast of Force lightning to the 2 Jedi, who were forced to jump into the temple. After calling a full retreat, they locked it down as best as they could, and while the temple may have been old, it could withstand a great deal of damage. After securing the temple and making it impenetrable for a brief moment, they decided that Obi-Wan, Luke, Leia, Sharman, Quinlan, and 2 other Jedi Knights would be the one to face Darth Vader, and tasked Cal Kestis, Ezra Bridger, Caleb Doom, and any other Jedi Knight that was not wounded to defend the Jedi Temple and the other Jedi. But Obi-Wan completely disagreed with Luke, Leia, and Sharman joining him in his fight against Vader. Luke and Leia didn't even know Vader was their father yet. Obi-Wan also saw them as not ready to fight the Sith Lord, who basically took on the bulk of the Jedi Order by himself and won, insisted that this was their safest option. But before they could argue anymore, the ancient temple door started to buckle under the heavy firepower of the Empire, and finally burst open, revealing hundreds of stormtroopers and purge troopers. Luckily, Mace already killed most of the Inquisitors, so all that was left was around 7 of the weakest ones. And just as they planned, Obi-Wan and the others charged Vader, while Mace and Yoda both rushed Palpatine to finish what they started. As their blades clashed, they moved with impossible speed, and somehow Palpatine was just as strong as he was before, if not stronger, even though he was easily almost 100 years old. Moving down the ancient corridors, the sound of clashing blades echoed through the halls as they pushed the Sith Lord into a defensive form. But despite this, he still swung with great power and managed to clip Windu's arm and force push him back, slamming him into the wall. Yoda, realizing that this fight was between him and Palpatine once again, he summoned more strength than he ever had before and fought with such aggression that even Palpatine was surprised. Their fight continued for what seemed like hours, neither one of them gaining any ground or advantage. And that was until Yoda saw Mace Windu starting to regain consciousness, but Palpatine would see an opportunity with Yoda being distracted, shoot a deadly barrage of Force lightning at Yoda. Reacting in a split second, Yoda would drop his lightsaber and quickly use the same Force ability he used the last time this happened to absorb the lightning. But this was too much for the ancient Jedi as he started to lose control, and was about to drop his hands from exhaustion when a sound and smell of burning flesh filled the room, as Mace Windu's purple blade was thrusted into the back of the Sith Lord. As Mace rushed over to his old friend's side to help, the Dark Lord of the Sith, with almost a century of training in the dark side and the power of all the Sith before him, would get back up. It would shoot the most powerful Force lightning he had ever conjured up and directed it at Mace and Yoda. The lightning completely engulfed Mace as he fried. It would have engulfed Yoda if it wasn't for Luke and Ezra jumping in at the last moment and blocking it with their lightsabers. However, this was the most powerful Force lightning that anyone has ever seen, and Luke and Ezra would only buy them an extra few seconds. And in that few seconds, Luke would take on the bulk of the lightning and eventually drop his lightsaber and burn to a crisp. Yoda could only watched as Ezra slowly fell to his knees and was about to drop his lightsaber when Mace called upon both the dark and light side of the Force to shoot his own Force lightning at Palpatine. The lightning from the two was so powerful that it produced a blinding light, and the sound of crackling lightning filled the temple, and Mace would use everything in him to overpower Palpatine and would cause a Force explosion, disintegrating the Sith Lord instantly. But the Force explosion was so powerful, it also killed Mace Windu. Yoda and Ezra could feel the Force leaving the bodies of Luke and Mace as they became one with the Force. Remember that Obi-Wan and the others were still fighting Darth Vader, Yoda got up and with the help of Ezra made it to the area where the Duel of the Fates was occurring as Obi-Wan, Leia, and Charmin attacked Vader. The other two Jedi, along with Quinlan, were dead. Obi-Wan would look up to see that only Yoda and Ezra were there and not Luke. Realizing that he'd once again failed to protect Luke, Obi-Wan would lunge at Vader with speed he only achieved on Mustafar. As he jumped and leaped around Vader, he would hit him anywhere he could, and as they continued to fight, the sound of blaster fire echoed the halls as a dozen or so stormtroopers entered the room and opened fire on them. Ezra, not wanting another one of his friends to die, would jump down and give in to the dark side as he cut down each and every one of the stormtroopers. Having enough of this, Darth Vader would throw his lightsaber at Obi-Wan, who was busy protecting Leia from blaster fire. But before he was hit, Charmin would jump in the way as he was stabbed by the Crimson Blade. As he fell, Obi-Wan finally had enough and used the Force to push everyone away except for him and Vader as they engaged in their final fight. Obi-Wan was his newfound purpose in the New Jedi Order, and Darth Vader, who was at his peak with the dark side flowing through his veins. As they locked sabers, Obi-Wan stared into the robotic helmet of Darth Vader, his former apprentice and former brother. As they exchanged strikes at each other, it reminded Obi-Wan of Mustafar, as they both were striking at each other with such precision and speed neither of them have ever achieved before. And for a while, it seemed as if neither of them were winning, and that was until Vader conjured up a powerful Force push and threw Obi-Wan into the wall. Obi-Wan, realizing that he had no chance of defeating Vader at the blade, realized that the only way of him winning was by revealing the truth about his children. So as Vader walked over to finally kill Obi-Wan, Kenobi told him that his children were alive. Vader would stop mid-swing and lower his lightsaber. As he looked to Obi-Wan, he demanded more truth. Seeing no other option, Obi-Wan would tell him everything. Vader didn't want to believe him. How could he? Padme died because of him, unless he didn't kill her and Palpatine lied to him. Which, the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much it made sense. Palpatine has been using him since day one. Everything down to the death of Qui-Gon Jinn was Palpatine's fault. The dark side didn't give him power, it made him miserable and took everything from him. As Vader processed this, he just stood there, eventually looked up at Leia and walked out. Obi-Wan let him. There was no point in stopping him now, he knew the truth. As Vader walked outside, he used all of his anger and hatred he felt towards everything and lifted up every stormtrooper, purge trooper, and remaining inquisitor with the Force and snapped their necks simultaneously, and then took a ship and jumped into hyperspace. Shortly after that, the 3 Star Destroyers left. Not waiting for another wave, the Jedi would take what little they had and leave the planet. Death toll for the Jedi was catastrophic. Only 20 of the 60 Jedi survived the attack, but they would rebuild. They have done it before and they would do it again. But before Obi-Wan and Yoda even had a time to sit down, they would be called into a room where they had a holographic video displayed and it was broadcasted across the entire galaxy. And what was shown was a giant space station surrounded by dozens of Star Destroyers. But before Obi-Wan could even ask what was happening, the station exploded. And as that happened, he felt the presence of Anakin Skywalker one last time as he descended into the Force, as the secret weapon that the Empire has been building since the start of the Clone Wars exploded into 1 trillion pieces. After this, the new Jedi Order would join the rebellion and help them retake the galaxy from the Empire, thanks to Darth Vader destroying the bulk of the Empire's high-ranking officials. And thanks to Vader destroying the bulk of the Empire's high-ranking officials and a lot of their Star Destroyers, the Galactic Civil War would not last long, and after the Battle of Jakku and the formal destruction of the Empire, the Jedi would disappear into the Outer Rim to rebuild one last time and truly become the protectors that the galaxy needed. Obi-Wan would eventually tell Leia the truth about her father and what he did. She surprisingly took it very well, but the death of her brother changed her. She became more cold and distant. It would take many years, and most of the surviving Jedi from the Purge would pass on, but at last the galaxy was at peace, and the Jedi Order would rebuild themselves on the planet of Tython, the Verlin Nexus, and many other planets across the galaxy to become the protectors of the Force that they were meant to be, serving only the Force and no specific side. And for many years, there would be no major conflicts in the galaxy. And that was until they got reports of a former Zabrak Sith warrior who had returned from the Outer Rim to reclaim the galaxy under his criminal empire with his new apprentice, Darth Talon.
What if Anakin Skywalker was trained by the Force itself? Our story begins in 41 BBY, where the 2 Sith Lords stood frozen in the oppressive darkness, their crimson eyes narrowed as the air around them seemed to grow heavier and colder. Something was profoundly wrong. Darth Plagueis tilted his head, the damp, still air filling his lungs as he steadied himself. Rising slowly from the ground, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of uncertainty that gnawed at his calculating mind. Beside him, his apprentice, Darth Sidious, was equally shaken. The disturbance in the Force was unlike anything they had ever encountered, a rippling wave that sent shock after shock through their dark connection to the galaxy's lifeblood. Palpatine pressed his hand to his temple. His thoughts were racing. He reached throughout the Force, trying to make sense of the vergence they had felt. A power vast and unrestrained, yet utterly alien. He had spent years bending the Force to his will, manipulating the midichlorians in pursuit of immortality. But now the Force had pushed back. What chilled him most was not the rebellion itself, but the void it left in his awareness. Whatever have happened, whatever they have unleashed, was beyond even his comprehension. Turning sharply to Sidious, Palpatine locked eyes with his student. Sidious, usually the embodiment of cold confidence, looked shaken, his composure slipping ever so slightly. Without hesitation, Plagueis hissed, "We leave now." There was no time for debate, no room for arrogance. He could feel it. A seismic shift in the galaxy, a tidal wave of power surging against them, aligning in opposition of the grand design. The Force itself was no longer their ally. Far across the galaxy, the Jedi High Council chamber was gripped by an eerie stillness. What had begun as another routine meeting was shattered in an instant. A pulse of energy, pure and radiant, swept through the Force with such intensity that even the most composed Jedi Masters faltered. It wasn't a presence of darkness. Far from it. It was something entirely different. A power born of light, unrestrained and unyielding. Yoda sat silently, his fingers tightened on his crane. He glanced towards Yaddle, who returned his look, her expression mirroring his alarm. Master Mundi, normally stoic-faced, bared in unease as the masters exchanged glances. The unspoken truth heavied the air. None of them knew what to do, and for the first time in years, the Council, those tasked with protecting the galaxy, felt powerless, unsure of the path forward. This light wasn't a salvation, it was a warning, an awakening that opened up the doors for chaos. Far in the uncharted depths of the unknown region, a figure cloaked in pure darkness stirred from its slumber. Its form was fluid and terrifying, an embodiment of shadow and malice. This being's many eyes opened, piercing the void as it felt the shift rebirthing through the Force. This power, raw, untamed, was an enigma. Its very presence was an affront to her domination over chaos. She reached out through the darkness, clawing through the strands of the Force, searching. This disturbance, whatever it was, could not be allowed to grow. It was a threat unlike anything she had ever encountered, something that could challenge her over her hold over the galaxy. Her anger twisted into cunning as he reached further, feeling for potential allies, seeds of darkness she could nurture into weapons against the light. The galaxy trembled, its fate now teetering on the brink. What had been unleashed was more than a disturbance. It was a reckoning. Looking across the deserts of Tatooine, Shmi watched as the twin suns slowly descended across the darkening sky. Glancing down to her dozing off son, whom she had named Anakin, she stared at him lovingly, but she couldn't help but feel conflicted. She had this thought for the past 9 years. Since Anakin was born practically, it confused her that there was no father, yet she bore a child. Lifting her gaze, she soon saw a hooded figure standing in front of her house. Confused, she opened the door to greet the person, who, much to the shock to Shmi, said he was the boy's father. Shocked, Shmi stepped back. She had never seen that man in her life. But before calling out for help, the man reached out with his hands and used the Force to show her the true purpose of her son. As she calmed down, she understood why he was there. He needed Anakin. Shmi hesitated though. He wasn't a Jedi, but he could use what they would call the Force. But once again, the man reassured her and helped her understand what he was. Looking down at her son, she somberly handed him over to the supposed father, who, after taking Anakin into his arms, disappeared in the blink of an eye. Anakin Skywalker walked with the hooded figure as they stepped through an invisible passage that only they could see. Its edges pulsed with an unnatural glow that defied the laws of reality. As they passed through, the fabrics of time and space warped around them, pulling them into the realm of infinite light and shadow. Here, the familiar rules of the galaxy dissolved, replaced by an endless void where moments stretched and collapsed simultaneously. The air around them hummed with power, and the pair found themselves standing on a suspended plane, surrounded by a dimension that felt both eternal and fleeting. In this dimension, Anakin would grow up with the man, or more accurately, his father. Though he lacked the normal traits of a father, he had no physical form, and existed purely as light. He could not age, yet was timeless.
he had claimed to existed since the very beginning and even before that. He explained to Anakin that he existed in everything. He was the midichlorians, or the Force as some would call him. As his father tried explaining all of this, Anakin was completely dumbfounded by everything. Where in the galaxy was he? Or was he even in the galaxy anymore? It all felt so surreal. He looked around and saw a place filled with light and unique life. Wandering through this strange plane, Anakin couldn't help but feel connected to everything. He felt so much control and peace here, and that's when his father explained to him what the Force was and how this place was full of it. Turning around, Anakin asked why did he need him, to which the father would simply reply with, "To train you for your destiny," as he walked with Anakin to begin his long training. Back on Coruscant, the Jedi sat in emergency meeting. They all had felt it, another disturbance in the Force, just like the one they had felt 9 years ago. A powerful presence that lacked any reasoning. The Jedi couldn't defer if it was a cause for concern. Yoda, looking confused, sat with his hands on his chin as he pondered if the Sith were returning. The darkness in the galaxy was indeed growing, especially since the disturbance 9 years ago. He could feel two different beings, one of pure light side and the other of dark. The whole ordeal confused him. It made no sense. But that's when he remembered something. He remembered a person who had met over a decade ago named Hugo Damask. He had given off the same dark presence that he had felt now, only this was far more pungent and elusive. Yoda wondered if maybe Damask had something to do with this. However, if he did or didn't was impossible to decide now, as interesting enough, 9 years ago, Hugo Damask alongside Senator Sheev Palpatine from Naboo disappeared from the face of the galaxy and left no trace of their existence. This left the role of Senator to be filled by the former Queen of Naboo, Padme, who was one of the youngest senators in galactic history, sitting at only 14 years old. The mere thought of Damask confused Yoda. If he were to come to an answer, he would need to meditate on this. A lot. Standing atop the crimson sands of Korriban, Darth Plagueis inhaled deeply, letting the dry, suffocating air fill his lungs. The dark side coursed through him, potent and unrelenting. The very essence of this ancient Sith world saturated his every thought, but beneath its intoxicating allure, Plagueis felt it, a disturbance. The Force itself seemed to recoil, a silent warning of the cost of meddling with its deepest secrets. Shifting his gaze, he observed his apprentice, Darth Sidious, channeling his fury as he crushed massive boulders into dust with the Force. Sidious had grown into a formidable Sith, his anger sharp and seething, a perfect weapon for ambition and hatred. Plagueis' gaze drifted to the tombs of the Sith Lords, their decayed remains resting in eternal torment. Even from a distance, he could feel their rage and suffering, radiating like the heat of a burning star. This planet, their ancestral homeworld, was a crucible of power, a place where the dark side was most alive. Lost in thought, Plagueis pondered the paths he had chosen. If he had remained closer to the Republic, would Palpatine have risen to the role of Chancellor as he had schemed, or would he have been struck down like many other weak-willed senators? He was aware of the hidden apprentice that Sidious took, a young Dathomirian Zabrak boy named Maul, but he was no longer an issue, as Plagueis had killed him shortly before leaving the Republic. But he wondered if that was part of Palpatine's plan to kill him. The endless possibilities turned in his mind until something snapped him back. Plagueis froze, Sidious did too. Both felt it, a tremor unlike anything they had ever known. Slowly, their gaze locked, an unspoken question hanged between them. What in the Force had they just sensed? As Plagueis opened his mouth to speak, the air shifted, heavy with an unspeakable presence. Something vast and unfathomable had woken, its terror rippling across the galaxy. Plagueis turned his head, his eyes narrowing as he settled on Sidious. The apprentice's expression was as unreadable as ever. Before a fleeting moment, Plagueis wondered, was it him? And then it came, a cold wave of pure, suffocating darkness. Plagueis felt it, a being of incomprehensible malevolence stirring, rising from the void. The Force itself seemed to recoil in terror, something ancient, something that even the Sith of old would have feared. Something had returned. Years passed for Anakin, though in the real galaxy it was only a matter of months. And under his father's guidance, Anakin's power grew exponentially, and it shaped into the best version of himself. his father withheld nothing, sharing every secret of the Force, and ensuring that Anakin learned everything through both rigorous training and deep philosophical questions. Every day was a test, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Though Anakin was content in this mysterious realm, a part of him longed for his mother. The thought of her waiting on Tatooine never truly left his mind. It would be in these times where his father would remind him of why they couldn't return, not yet, explaining how time worked differently in this dimension. What had felt like years to Anakin had only been a few months in the galaxy, yet the concept of this baffled him. He had grown taller, stronger, and wiser, yet his old worries remained almost untouched. Anakin's training covered every aspect of the Force. His father pushed him to explore the depths of both the light and dark side, teaching him the philosophies, strengths, and weaknesses of each. Anakin learned to summon the raw power of the dark side, mastering its ability to bend reality and fuel his strength, while also embracing the serenity and insight of the light. His natural talent allowed him to walk on this razor edge, though he ultimately would choose the light over the dark, believing it aligned more with his dreams of returning to Tatooine and freeing the slaves. Despite this, the allure of the dark side never fully left him. It called to him in whispers, promising power that no one could ever challenge. But he would shut all of these thoughts out. Shortly after turning 18 years old, his father deemed him ready to begin lightsaber training. Unlike the Jedi who introduced lightsabers early on, his father had waited, wanting Anakin to understand the Force first. The lightsaber is merely an extension of your will, he had once said, not just a tool, but a reflection of your mastery over the Force and yourself. To create his lightsaber, Anakin was tasked with forging his crystal using only the Force. No tools, no shortcuts, just raw connection and focus. For over a year, he meditated in isolation, channeling the Force to shape the crystal. It was an excruciating process, one that tested his patience, strength, and resolve. And when he finally emerged, his lightsaber blade ignited and it was a brilliant white glow, a symbol of his unique balance between the light and dark. His training with the weapon was no less demanding. For 5 years, Anakin trained tirelessly, devoting 15 hours every day to lightsaber combat. His father made him master every single form that there was to know, ensuring that he understood their principles, advantages, and limitations. Form 1 taught him the basics, Form 2 the elegance of precision, Forms 3 honed in his defensive strategies, Form 4 was acrobatic, but it was Form 5, Degem So, that resonated most deeply with him. Its philosophy of controlled aggression and counterattacks suited his natural power and relentless drive. By the end of his excruciating training, Anakin was unparalleled in combat. His blade moved with such speed and precision that even his father acknowledged that he had surpassed him. His training, however, wasn't limited to combat. Anakin was taught strategy, meditation, and how to sense the subtle currents of the Force in everything around him. His father often pit him against challenges that forced him to think beyond brute strength, whether that be solving impossible Force puzzles or battling illusions of ancient Sith or Jedi. Each trial left him stronger and more attuned to his surroundings. And by the end of his training, Anakin had become more than just a student. He was a warrior, a tactician, and a beacon of both light and darkness. But above all, he was ready. Though he still dreamed of returning to Tatooine to free the slaves, Anakin knew that his destiny was far greater. For now, he waited, honing in his skills and preparing for the moment when the galaxy would need him. Darth Plagueis shot awake, gasping for breath as he found himself surrounded by an endless void of darkness. The air was suffocating, thick with the dark side, an unrelenting presence of darkness. It was unlike anything he had ever felt, so potent it nearly crushed him. As his vision adjusted, he had spotted a figure in the shadows. It was his apprentice, Darth Sidious, standing unnervingly still, his eyes vacant yet shimmering with an unnatural rage. Before Plagueis could speak, Sidious looked back, his face twisted with fury as he ignited his crimson blade. Without hesitation, he charged forward, his attacks a relentless storm that forced Plagueis onto the defensive. Caught off guard by this sudden betrayal, Plagueis parried the onslaught and demanded to know what was happening, but Sidious said nothing, his cold, lifeless eyes staring back with unbridled malice. With a desperate burst of the Force, Plagueis shoved his apprentice back, trying to regroup, and that's when he saw her, emerging from the void,
was Abeloth, her grotesque form illuminated by the eerie glow of her malice. The realization hit Plagueis all too late. She had already twisted his apprentice into her slave. He barely had time to react before her power struck him like a tidal wave. His form disintegrated in an instant. Abeloth didn't even glance at her victim. Her attention was focused on Sidious. Her lips curved into a sinister smile as she regarded her new pawn. "You shall serve me well," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "The galaxy will fall." She knew that now, but first there was unfinished business. Turning to the void, Abeloth vanished into the shadows, her sights set on Mortis, and a family reunion she had waited far too long for. As Anakin trained with his father, he was shocked to see him suddenly pause and then seemed concerned. His father had never even seemed fazed before, but something had changed. Anakin could feel it too. A darkness unlike anything he had ever imagined. Looking over to his father, Anakin was about to ask what had happened when his father beat him to it and whispered quietly, "She has awakened." As he looked back at Anakin, a face full of fear. Peering across the surface of Mortis, the father felt a ripple in the cosmic force. A dark and dreadful change. Someone had returned. He stepped out onto the balcony, his eyes scanning the night skies for an answer, searching through the force, but he found none. But before he could turn around, an overwhelming power seized him, lifting him into the air. The father locked eyes with a twisted smile. Abeloth had returned. Her nightmarish form descended. She had waited far too long for this moment. The father was hurled back into his palace with a brutal force, crashing against the cold stone floor. Struggling to rise, he was suddenly grabbed by the throat and slammed against a wall. Her claws raked into his body like serrating daggers. Summoning the force to repel her, he found himself helpless as he was thrown across the room again, his strength no match for her unbridled fury. Staggering to his feet, he looked to his left and right. There he saw it. His children, the daughter and the son, had entered the chamber. No, he thought, they cannot face her. But before he could act, he was slammed and forced onto the ground once more, and was forced to watch the nightmare unfold. Abeloth moved with horrifying speed, lunging at the daughter. Despite her desperate attempt to block with the force, Abeloth shattered through her defenses as if they were nothing. Lifting the daughter high, she ripped her in half with merciless glee, hurling the broken remains to the corners of the room, leaving her to die in agony. As she bled out, alone, the son stood frozen, his face etched with horror, as Abeloth began circling him like a predator savoring its prey. He wanted to scream, he wanted to demand her to stop, but he couldn't do anything. Suddenly, she grabbed the father by the throat, locking eyes with the son, as she placed his hand on his head and ripped the father's head from his body in one swift, chilling motion. Before the son could react, Abeloth seized him and forced him to gaze upon his once mighty family, now reduced to lifeless ruins strewn across the chamber. "This is your fate," she hissed, her grip tightening. With a deliberate cruelty, she crushed his skull slowly, savoring every scream and every moment of his demise. The gods of Mortis were no more. Abeloth had returned to claim her throne of chaos. Yoda was thrown back. Never in his life had he felt such pain and suffering. The Force was thrown out of balance. The light were crippled. The Force itself was in pain. Yoda rushed and called an emergency meeting, but was stopped by the council members Qui-Gon Jinn and Dooku, who had also felt the disturbance in the Force and insisted they knew what had happened. Wasting no time, Qui-Gon explained everything he could and told Yoda how a prophecy long forgotten was finally being fulfilled, and a chosen one will emerge. But the path of which it will occur was far darker than any of them could ever imagine. Hearing this, Yoda stopped and suddenly pulled out his comlink and it ordered an immediate evacuation of the entire planet, sensing that something was approaching Coruscant, something of pure evil. Breathing in the death, suffering, and darkness, Abeloth forced her new student, Darth Sidious, to endure endless torture in the dark side, purging him of any weaknesses he may have still had. While it completely shattered his mind, he grew unmatched in the dark side, a true Sith Lord. Looking to the now gray sky, Abeloth grabbed Sidious as they began their conquest against the galaxy. Anakin stood before his father, the weight of destiny heavy in the air. Though he had spent over 15 years in this strange dimension, only 1 year had passed in the galaxy he had once called home, and in that time, something ancient and dark had awakened. Turning to his father, Anakin's voice was shaky but resolute as he asked for permission to leave. His father's heart wavered, not wanting to part with his son, yet knowing that this moment was inevitable. "You are meant for this," he finally said, his voice filled with both sorrow and pride. With a solemn nod, he opened the portals back to the main galaxy, the swirling energy illuminating Anakin's determined face. Hesitating for a second, Anakin looked around one last time before stepping through, vanishing into the unknown to confront the darkness and fulfill his destiny. Watching the endless streams of evacuation shuttles leaving Coruscant, Yoda paced anxiously around the Jedi Council room. The planet's population was far too immense, trillions spread across 5,000 levels, and he knew evacuating even the smallest fraction of them would take weeks. Luckily though, half of the Jedi had already begun their departure, including Master Qui-Gon Jinn and Dooku, who had volunteered to oversee the evacuation. As Yoda stared into the sky, lost in grim thought, Master Ki-Adi-Mundi entered. His expression alongside his massive forehead was tense. "Master Yoda," he said, "our scanners have detected something massive." Before Yoda could respond, the Force trembled. A twisted, monstrous figure emerged in the distance. Lifting her arms to the heavens, Abeloth had arrived. Instantly, the remaining shuttles in the atmosphere imploded in a fiery burst, their passengers inside instantly annihilated. Without pause, she unleashed her fury on the planet itself, awakening long-dormant volcanoes, causing them to erupt. Rivers of molten fire erupted from the surface, obliterating the first 1,000 levels in an instant and incinerating everyone inside of them. The air thickened with darkness as Abeloth's corrupting power spread, driving the remaining population into madness. It was so pungent that Mundi fell dead in an instant. The sheer force of her will pressed against Yoda's mind, nearly breaking him. He fought to remain steady, but his focus was soon shattered when a crimson blade slashed past him. Barely grazing his ear, Yoda flipped backwards, turning to see Sheev Palpatine, the former senator of Naboo, but now unmasked as a Sith Lord. His face twisted with malice. Sidious charged at Yoda. His strikes were a relentless storm of fury. Yoda, who this should have been an easy match for, struggled to hold his own ground, deflecting the Sith's attack while simultaneously resisting the overwhelming darkness emanating from Abeloth. Each blow drained him. Every moment threatened to break his concentration, and despite his immense power, Yoda faltered, and a final strike sent him crashing to the ground, dead. Looking around, Sidious realized his job was now done. As he departed, Abeloth turned her attention to the planet's core, and with a single motion, she reached into the very heart of Coruscant and crushed it with her dark power. The ground trembled violently before Coruscant erupted in a blinding explosion, shattering into nothingness in mere seconds. Abeloth floated above the destruction, looking upon what used to be the galaxy's heart, her monstrous form a silhouette against the dying light of the galaxy's former heart. The beginning of the end had begun. Dooku sensed this and nearly fainted. His former student, alongside every other Jedi, were not so lucky, as he, alongside every other Jedi, passed out because of the death and destruction. Chances are they were probably the last Jedi in the entire galaxy, as theirs and about 4 other shuttles managed to jump into hyperspace before that monster had arrived. Once all the Jedi were accounted for, only 80 or so members remained. Dooku sensed this and redirected the shuttle's course from Ilum to Tython, where they would regroup and form their final stand. As Anakin stepped through the portal, a wave of horror washed over him. The once familiar sands of Tatooine were now a graveyard, littered with mutilated bodies and the ruins of buildings torn apart by violence. His heart sank as he scanned the devastation, only to see her, his mother, Shmi, struggling for her life as a shadowy figure held her in the air by a force choke. Shocked and enraged, Anakin unleashed a powerful force push, sending the attacker hurtling into a crumbling building. Rushing to his mother's side, Anakin cradled her, relieved to see her still alive. But before he could get her to safety, the Sith Lord rose once more from the wreckage and charged. Setting Shmi down gently, Anakin ignited his white lightsaber, meeting the Sith's ferocious strikes head-on. Their duel was relentless. The Sith forced Anakin back with his sheer aggression, but Anakin was patient as he held his ground, waiting for the moment. Catching the Sith in a saber lock with a swift sidestep, he used the man's momentum against him, severing his arm a single decisive stroke. Expecting the Sith to surrender, Anakin prepared to question him, demanding his name and his purpose. Instead, the man lunged again, unrelenting even in the face of such injuries. Blocking another strike, Anakin narrowly avoided a fatal blow as the Sith jabbed at his skull. The Sith was a force of pure persistence, his hatred fueling his every move. But Anakin had seen enough. Lifting the Sith into the air, he reached into the dark corners of the Force, searching for answers. A name steeped in darkness. With a surge of power, Anakin did the unthinkable. He cleansed the man known as Sidious's mind of darkness, unraveling the hatred that had consumed him for years. And in the same moment, Anakin also severed his connection to the Force, leaving him powerless. As the Sith Lord returned to himself, the weight of his atrocities bore down on him. No longer blinded by rage or the dark side, Sidious looked at the carnage surrounding him with fresh eyes. And rather being filled with a sense of pride, he instead was filled with horror. The pain, the death, the devastation, it all overwhelmed him. Confused and broken, the man once known as Darth Sidious stumbled towards a nearby shuttle. For the first time in his life, he truly felt the weight of the lives he had taken, and it crushed him. Without a word, he fled the planet, vanishing into the unknown regions for the rest of his life, hoping to seek refuge from the nightmares he had unleashed and the man he had become. Anakin watched him go, his mother safe in his arms. However, he also knew that the galaxy had shifted in a way no one could have foreseen. As Anakin and his mother finally reunited, Anakin could feel something was majorly off with the balance of the Force. He had known that the monster known as Abeloth had awoken, but he was unaware of just how powerful she was. And that was until he visited over a dozen planets and saw what remained of them. Ryloth, Sereno, Alderaan, Geonosis, Raxus, and so many more, all gone. Pained by what he had seen, Anakin felt through the Force and sensed something that gave him hope. A surviving sect of Jedi on the planet of Tython, the ancient homeworld of the Jedi. His father had told him about it before and that how the Force was the strongest there. After arriving out of hyperspace, Anakin soon met with the person who he assumed was their leader, who introduced himself as Master Dooku. Quickly meeting with the other leaders, Anakin introduced himself and told them about his purpose. And while at first many of them were skeptical, they soon realized that if he was true, he would be the one to kill Abeloth, and he would bring balance to the galaxy. But then that's when Dooku asked who that monster was, and Anakin, still fresh in the galaxy, didn't know much but told them what he knew from his father. And after hearing this, Qui-Gon shot up with realization and explained that he knew how they might kill her. It was an old Jedi weapon, but there was rumors of a weapon known as the Dagger of Mortis. And to say this is an old legend would be an understatement. And there's a very real possibility that it wasn't even real. But if it was their only chance at killing this creature, they decided it was worth the risk. And that's when Anakin volunteered to retrieve the dagger and kill Abeloth while the rest of the Jedi worked on distracting her. But when Dooku asked how they would even manage to not die by the sheer power of her darkness, Anakin told them to not worry, as he would give them each a piece of his power to help protect them. Dooku and Qui-Gon looked at each other. They didn't like the plan, but they knew it was the only one they had. So they agreed, and mere moments later, Anakin left once more. Dooku looked up to where Anakin's shuttle had just jumped into hyperspace. He wondered what would have happened if he was raised as a Jedi. He laughed a little. The young man seemed so reckless yet eager. It reminded Dooku much of himself. And before he even had time to question if Anakin had lied about giving them parts of his Force abilities, all the Jedi, including his mother, suddenly felt a surge of power, and just in time too. As from the skies, the demon Abeloth slowly descended and begun her final battle against the remaining threat left in the galaxy. As Anakin raced through the labyrinth caves of Mortis, his thoughts were haunted by the chilling sight of what he had just left behind. The lifeless forms of the gods of Mortis sprawled in the chamber. Anakin knew who they were and just how powerful they were, and to see the sheer ease of which the powerful entity had struck them down unnerved him. But there was no time to dwell on the horror. Guided by his father's presence and the Force, Anakin navigated the twisting tunnels and eventually found what he sought, the Dagger of Mortis. Just as he was about to leave, a voice drifted from the shadows, low and venomous. A tall, slender woman emerged from the darkness, her movements slow and deliberate as she circled the edges of his vision. Her words, laced with malice, cut through the silence. "Are you here?" to kill me? Anakin's heart sank as the realization hit him. He had walked straight into a trap. Summoning the Force, he fled the caves of Mortis, his pulse pounding in his ears as he reached the planet's desolate surface. He reached for his comlink, but before he could activate it, it was ripped from his grasp by an unseen force and crushed into fragments. His blood ran cold as Abeloth emerged, her grotesque form slithering towards him with a twisted smile, her presence radiating malice and hunger. Anakin steadied himself, drawing on the Force as he exhaled slowly. Abeloth was ready to kill again, but so was Anakin. The Chosen One had a prophecy to fulfill. Dooku ignited his blue lightsaber, its sharp hum slicing through the eerie silence. He readied himself to confront the monstrous figure before him, but the creature simply raised its hand as a gurgle and unholy chant filled the air as the ground trembled. Dooku's sharp gaze darted to the grounds around him, the battlefield, and his heart sank. Corpses of long-dead Jedi and Sith began to stir. What remained of them, mostly bones, began to regrow flesh as their grotesque forms reassembled themselves, and their shattered lightsabers flickered back to life. Pulsing with dark power, the reanimated warriors surged towards him, their movements uncoordinated yet unnervingly relentless. Their attacks were very sloppy, but the sheer strength they possessed and numbers pushed Dooku alongside the other Jedi back. Dooku's blade spun in a deadly dance as he parried and countered every strike, and every time he severed a limb, it would grotesquely reattach itself mere seconds later. He fought with precision, his acrobatic grace now a whirlwind of desperation, but the dead kept on coming. Not far away, Qui-Gon and the other Jedi were locked in their own brutal struggle. The relentless tide of the undead warriors thinned their numbers as their comrades fell to the feral onslaught. Despite their losses, the Jedi regrouped, their unity and resolve unwavering. Through grit and sheer determination, they managed to push back through the horde, reaching Dooku, who was on the brink of being overwhelmed. Together, the Jedi rallied as a symphony of lightsabers clashed against the undead as the group fought as one, carving a path through the relentless dead. With their combined power, they turned their focus towards Abeloth, summoning the Force to immobilize her. And for a brief moment, to everyone's shock, it seemed as if victory was within their grasp, until the horrifying truth revealed itself, as the monstrous figure before them dissolved into a mist, an illusion of Abeloth's design. Her presence remained on Mortis, chilling and oppressive, as her laughter echoed throughout the caverns. From the shadows, more corpses stirred, rising once again, their flesh reanimated and their bones cracked back into place as the dead advanced. Stronger and more numerous than before, the nightmare was far from over. The battle between Anakin and Abeloth erupted with the ferocity of a dying star, the clash of ultimate power that had shattered the boundaries of Mortis itself. An abomination born of chaos and the dark side towered over the Chosen One, her grotesque form withering unnaturally, her many faces twisted into malevolent grins as the black tendrils of energy oozed from her, wrapping around the very air around her. Anakin, the embodiment of the Force's will, stood firm, his lightsaber ignited and his resolve unshaken. "You think you can challenge me, little boy?" Abeloth hissed, her voice echoing the screams of the damned. "I have devoured gods. You are nothing." Before Anakin could respond, she lashed out, her hands snapping forward. Invisible claws of dark energy wrapped around his throat, lifting him off the ground into a crushing force choke. Anakin's hands clawed at his neck as he struggled for air, but he quickly centered himself. Drawing on the Force, he broke free with an explosive telekinetic burst that sent Abeloth skidding back. Not wasting a second, Anakin surged forward, his lightsaber flashing as he unleashed a fury of Form 5, 7, and 3 strikes. A flurry of Form 2, 4, 5, and 7 strikes, primarily Form 5. Each swing was calculated, designed to overpower, but Abeloth countered with terrifying speed. Her talons moved like shadows, deflecting his blade as she cackled. With the flick of her wrist, she sent him flying into the air. But Anakin twisted mid-flight, landing gracefully and hurtling a massive boulder at her with the Force. Abeloth shattered the boulder with a wave of her hand, the shards turning to dust before they could even touch her. "You'll have to do better than that," she sneered, raising her arms as she summoned a swirling storm of dark-side energy. The ground crackled as the sky sent down bursts of lightning, and rising into jagged spires around her. Anakin's eyes narrowed as he quickly activated Tutamenis, absorbing the waves of lightning she hurled at him. The effort it required was immense. Sweat dripped down from his face as he held steady. Abeloth's smile faltered when she realized her power was being neutralized. Snarling, she extended her arms, pulling debris from the environment and launching it at him like missiles. Dodging and deflecting with his lightsaber, Anakin closed the distance between them, his hands outstretched, and Abeloth froze mid-attack. Her limbs locked as Anakin gripped her with a powerful Force choke. Her laughter persisted though, sending a chill down Anakin's spine. "You dare to use my own power against me?" she rasped, and with a roar she broke his hold, reversing the attack and slamming him into the ground with a crushing telekinetic wave. Anakin groaned but rolled aside just before a massive clawed hand struck where his head would have been. He retaliated by summoning a Force whirlwind, lifting Abeloth into the air and smashing her into a nearby wall. As her back slammed into the wall, she retaliated with a banshee-like scream that distorted reality itself, sending Anakin reeling as his visions blurred. Seizing the moment, Abeloth rose into the air, her body splitting and reforming into grotesque shapes as she summoned rivers of molten lava from the ground. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with ash. But Anakin leapt from rock to rock, narrowly avoiding the fiery death below. Lightning rained from the skies, each bolt aimed with surgical precision. One struck just millimeters away from him, and the force of the blast sent him tumbling. "You are nothing but a pawn of destiny," Abeloth shrieked, her voice like a catacomb of hatred. She launched herself at Anakin, her claws slashing wildly. He ducked, sidestepped, and then countered with a Force-enhanced punch to her gut, sending her staggering. Reaching into his robes, Anakin drew the dagger of Mortis. Abeloth's eyes widened as he lunged at her, slashing her arm. Black ichor oozed from the wound as she howled in rage. She unleashed a torrent of Force lightning at him, the bolts pulverizing the ground beneath them and sending shockwaves that toppled nearby spires. Anakin absorbed what he could using Tutamenis, but staggered as the raw power overwhelmed him. Gritting his teeth, he channeled the Force into his own body, his strength surging as he deflected the remaining energy. With a mighty leap, he flipped over her, his lightsaber carving a fiery arc as he aimed it at her neck. Abeloth twisted unnaturally, evading the blow, and retaliated with a backhand that sent him hurtling into the temple walls. Anakin barely regained his senses in time to dodge her next strike. With lightning-fast reflexes, he grabbed her arm, spun her around, and drove the dagger towards her chest. Abeloth screamed as the blade pierced her shoulder, black energy spilling from the wound. Desperation flickered in her many eyes as Anakin pressed his advantage. Using the Force, she screamed at Anakin, "You cannot defeat me," her voice crackling with fear and fury, as she ripped the dagger from Anakin's hand and drove it into his chest. Anakin let out a gasp for air, stumbling back. Anakin said, his voice cold and steady, "But the Force can't." Abeloth roared, her body distorting and expanding as she summoned the last reserves of her power. The ground beneath them split open, rivers of lava pouring forth, and the sky above erupted into storms of lightning. The entire planet seemed to convulse with her wrath. Anakin, undeterred, leapt to the high ground, dodging bolts of energy as he closed the gap between them. The pain was excruciating, and with one final push, he ripped the dagger out of his chest as he plunged it into her skull. Abeloth froze, her form trembling as she let out a blood-curdling scream. Her body began to glow with an intense, blinding light, crackling and splintering as raw Force energy erupted from within. The explosion of power was deafening, a wave of pure energy that had consumed everything in its path. When the dust settled, Anakin stood amidst the ruins, battered but victorious. Abeloth was gone, her presence erased from the galaxy. The Chosen One had triumphed over the ultimate darkness, proving once again that he was the will of the Force made of flesh. Anakin slumped back as he took a deep breath. He had done it. The galaxy was saved. However, as he glanced down, he saw that his chest was opened. his time was up. Looking to his left, he could see his father as he floated over to Anakin, letting him know that his work was now done, and he can finally rest and join him forever. At first, Anakin resisted. He didn't want to leave his mother again, but then realized that she was with the Jedi. They will protect her. And so, taking a deep breath, Anakin closed his eyes for the last time and joined the living Force. Back on Tython, chaos reigned as Dooku was slammed into the dirt, his lightsaber shattered in two by the relentless assault by one of the undead. The creature loomed over him, its skeletal form glowing with the malevolent energy, poised to deliver the final killing blow. Quickly rolling out of the way, Dooku delivered a powerful force push, sending the monster crashing into the sides of one of the abandoned temples. Dooku's sharp eyes darted to the side where Qui-Gon Jinn stood amidst the carnage. The Jedi Master, battered and bloody, bore deep cuts that streaked his robes with crimson. Yet he fought on. Each swing of his lightsaber was a desperate bid to protect the remaining Jedi and the woman Anakin had entrusted to them. But it was clear that Qui-Gon was nearing his limit. And then one of the undead grabbed his hand and crushed it alongside his lightsaber. Crying in pain, Qui-Gon uppercutted the undead with his bare fist, and with one last cry of defiance, he threw his lightsaber and lunged at the nearest undead warrior, grappling it with his bare hands. His strikes were fierce but futile against the cold, unyielding husks. The other corpses closed in, their lightsabers humming with unnatural energy as they prepared to finish him. Suddenly, everything stopped. The undead froze in place, their weapons mid-swing as if seized by an invisible force. Then, without warning, their bodies began to disintegrate as if they were Thanos snapped out of reality. Collapsing into ash and dust, it was as if they never even existed, their remains falling silently to the blood-soaked ground. Dooku struggled to rise, watching the spectacle with wide eyes. He had done nothing. None of them have. His confusion quickly gave way to understanding as a ripple in the Force swept through him. He had felt it, a massive shift, a void where unrelenting darkness had once stood. Abeloth was gone. Anakin had done the impossible, but Dooku realized that this victory came at a cost. Dooku's sharp senses detected it. A fracture in the Force, a wound that carried Anakin's essence. The price of ending Abeloth's reign of terror has been steep, and while the battle was indeed over, Dooku feared what it had taken from the Chosen One, but then realized that he was now one with the Force, all around them. The dust of the undead settled around them, but the weight of what had transpired hung heavy in the air. The nightmare had ended, but its scars would remain forever. Following this, the galaxy would enter a stage of rebuilding. Trillions of lives were lost in the rampage of Abeloth, and dozens of planets were completely destroyed. But the remaining planets would rebuild, and the Jedi Order, under the control of Grandmaster Dooku and Qui-Gon, and the remaining Jedi Order with their surviving 38 other members, would help enter the galaxy into an era of peace. And this peace would last for the rest of the time, as the Sith were finally gone for good.